time and what the heathen profaned it, even in that it was with songs and ziths, harps, and cymbals. And all the people fell upon their faces, worshipping and praising the God of heaven, who had given them good success. Kept the dedication of the and offered offerings with gladness and sacrifice of burnt taste. They also in front of the temple with crowns of gold and with shields, gates and the chains they renewed, and hanged doors upon them. Thus was there very gladness among the people. Reproach was put away. This, brethren, with the congregation ordained is the dedication of the altar kept here by space of day from the 5 and 20th day of the month with mirth and gladness. At that time also builded Zion with high walls and strong towers round about. The Gentiles would come and tread it as they had done before. Set their garrison bit and fight Surah to preserve people to have a defense against Idumea. When the nations round heard the old built a sanctuary food as before, these them and then and to destroy people. There's force or you mean Arab a siege gale, and he great overthrow the bait and their sport. He remembered the children of there who had been a snare and an offense in the lay for them the way. He shut them up therefore in the towers and encamped against them and destroyed them utterly and burned the tower place with fire and all that were therein. He passed over to the church of 80 people with any they were discovered for smoke. And when taken belonged to, he went into Deer. Heathen were at Gilead, assembled themselves against the Israelites that were to destroy them. They to the death and sent letters to Judah and his heathen round us assembled there against us, and preparing to come and take the fortress whereunto we are fled, Timotheus being captain of their host. Come now, therefore, deliver us in their hands. Many of us are slain. Ye all our brethren from the place of Toby are their wives and their children also hid away captives and borne away stuff, and they have destroyed there 1,000 men. All these lands we yet behold, challenges from Galilee with their clothes this wise. They are all amazed under us, and all early are able to get against us. When Judas heard his words, trembled the great congregation again to consult what before their brethren that trouble and the of them. Then said Judas unto Simon, "See out and go to thy brethren at Galilee. I, Jonathan, my brother, will go into Galilee." So he left Joseph, the son of Zachariah, and people, remnant the host Judah to keep. Unto he gave, saying, "Take ye the charge, see that he make war against the heathen in the time that cometh." were given 3,000 men to go into Galilee. And unto Judas from Galilee. Then went Simon into Galilee, fought many battles with the heathen, so that the heathen would come by him. And he pursued them gate followers, and there were slain of the heathen about 3,000, whose spoils he took. Those in Galilee, their wives and their children, and all they had, took he away with, brought them into Judea with joy. Judas Maccabees also and his brother Jonathan went over Jordan and traveled 3 days' journey to the wilderness, where they were neighbors to the peaceable, and told them everything that happened in the land of Gilead, and how many of them got Bosor, Amtor, and Lima, passed for Miketz, and Canaan. All these cities grew, and up in the rest of the cities, country Gilead. Tomorrow they had appointed to bring their hosts against them, and to destroy them all in one day. Hereupon Judas and host turned suddenly by the way of the wilderness of Bosor, and he slew all the males with the sword, and took all their spoils, and burned the city with fire. From whence he removed by night, and went till he came to the fortress. And betimes in the morning they looked up, and behold, was an innumerable bearing and other things of war to take the fortress, for they assaulted them. When Judah therefore saw the battle begun, the cry of the city went.
Hey, everybody, and Hanukkah Sameach. So, keeping Hanukkah. We'll try to do this. Should we keep up? Should we not keep Hanukkah? It's time. In other words, time to talk about this. We do, I'll just talk briefly, we do Hanukkah by these, we kept the, like this for a second, read it. As we all know, and the entire time on, you know that there's no oil on much later. So this see on this is definitely of what they originally was meant to be. So why do I have it on this one? I like this. We grew up in the Hanukkah, and I'll be honest, when videos slow me out, and it happens sometimes. Maybe it'll help. So I grew up Jewish. Both my parents are Jewish, and so therefore I grew up lighting the Hanukkah menorah, and I know a lot of Karaites have told me the same thing. They love the traditions of Hanukkah, the menorah, and the dreidel, and the latkes, and all of this kind of stuff. So what I personally do is I light the menorah just for sentimental reasons, just because I think it's nice and beautiful. But I certainly don't say any of the blessings that, at least not the first blessing that the rabbis say. So the first blessing you're supposed to say when you light the Hanukkah menorah is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'adlik Channukah, which means, blessed are you, Lord. Blessed are you, Lord, Eloheinu, our God, King of the universe, asher kitshanu, who has sanctified us and commanded us, tzivanu, and commanded us to light the Hanukkah candle. Okay, and that I don't say. That's obviously sacrilegious. There's no place that God commanded Israel to light the Hanukkah candles, and of course the rabbis will always make the polemic. Well, the rabbis, meaning themselves, have the authority to make laws, or to basically be the intermediate of God on this earth. And if they make a law, it's as if God made it. Well, that's absolutely ridiculous. I won't even get into it. At any rate, so if we look at the first book of Maccabees, let me see if I can bring up the text. I believe it's in the end of chapter 4. First book of Maccabees, full text, translation, audio, drama, need that. We can just go thick. Oh no, that's not it. There it is. Full text from the Coptic Orthodox Church. For certain Christians, such as the Coptic Church, the Book of Maccabees is considered part of their canon. So, and I think actually the Book of Maccabees was preserved a lot through the various Christian churches that considered part of their canon. I could be wrong about that. At any rate, so here we have, let me see if I can share the screen. Let me do this a little bit differently. So now we are going to share screen. Sharing the screen. Now you can see a million of me. Correctly. So here's the first book of Maccabees. I did English, and we'll just read her very quickly, and then we'll get Torah. So then Gordon gives 5,000 men, explains in previous who this Gordon. 1,000 horsemen moved out of the night, that they might come upon the camp of them suddenly, that were of vassal guides, and Judah, he valiant men, the king's force, and Maos. For yet first from here. Let's skip ahead. Go to verse 16. And Judas returned again with an army that followed him, and he said to the people, not greedy wells. There is Warus, Georgius' army in the you now against our overthrow, and you shall spoil with safety. Behold, wait a second, we'll skip ahead a little. It'll be too long. Here, this is where 28. The Maccabees had been placed in charge of the Judah campaign, the Greek campaign against by Antiochus, gone off to look for your license together, score 1,000 men, 5,000 that he with them, and they came into and tents Oron, and Judas with 10 men. Okay, so 1,000 men, 1,000 men. The Greek Maccabee had 1,000 men, and they so strong. He said, "Blessed art thou, O Savior of Israel, break violence by the hand and deliver the camp into the hands of Channukah, the son of her. Shut up this army in the hands of thy people Israel, and let them be confounded in horsemen. Strike them and call at their own destruction. Cast them down with the sword of them that you. Let all name you in the battle. Fell of Lysias 5,000 men, 60,000. And when Lysias saw that his men were flight, how these were, that they were either to live, die manfully, he went to Antioch and soldiers, so that they may come again into Judea with greater numbers. Then Judas and his brethren said, "Behold, our enemies are discomfited. Let us go up now to cleanse the holy places and to repair them." And this is really the beginning of the Hanukkah story, right here. Okay, and all the army assembled together, and they went out up into Mount Sion, and they saw the sanctuary desolate, and the altar profaned, and the gates burnt. Gates were traditionally made out of wood, and there are many references throughout the Tanakh about burning gates, and shrubs growing up in the courts as in a forest or in the mountains, and the chambers joining to the temple thrown down. And they rent their garments and made great lamentation and put ashes on their heads. And they fell face down to the ground on their faces. And they sounded with the trumpets of alarm, and they cried towards heaven. Then Judas appointed men to fight against them that were in the castle till they had cleansed the holy places. And he chose priests without blemish, whose will was set upon the law of God. And they cleansed the holy places and took away the stones that had been defiled into an unclean place. And he considered about the altar of holocausts. This means the offering the altar where you put the burnt offerings that had been profaned, what he should do with it, right? Because the Greeks had been sacrificing, they'd set up an idol to their god there, and they'd been sacrificing unclean animals on the altar. And the good counsel came into their minds to pull it down, lest it should be a reproach to them, because the Gentiles had defiled it, so they threw it down. So they took the altar. So now they're up in the Temple Mount. They're there to cleanse it. They take the altar that the Greeks had used to sacrifice filthy animals on it, and they decide to destroy it, not to clean it or anything, just to completely destroy it. And they laid up the stones in the mountain of the temple in a convenient place. So according to the Book of Maccabees, this altar from the Second Temple is still somewhere on the Temple Mount. Maybe until this day, who knows? Till there should come a prophet and give answer concerning them. Then they took whole stones according to the law and built a new altar according to the former. Whole stones, that's mentioned in the Torah, that you're not allowed to use stones which have been cut with the tools of men, but they have to be whole stones. And they built up the holy places and the things that were within the temple, and they sanctified the temple and the courts, and they made new holy vessels and brought in the candlestick and the altar of incense and the table into the temples. This is basically right here. This is the only mention, well, in the next couple of verses as well, but the only mention of some kind of menorah, right? So, and this was just in part of making in the context of making the vessels that were in the that are always in the temple. So let's go back here. Where were we? Right? And they made new holy vessels and brought in the candlestick and the altar of incense and the table into the temple, new ones that they'd made, and they put incense upon the altar and lighted up the lamps that were upon the candlestick. Notice no mention here of any kind of 8-day miracle. If you would expect that if it were going to be mentioned, it would be mentioned right around here. And they gave light in the temple. And now later on, they gave light in the temple. Okay, so now the temple was lit up. Later on, Josephus speaks about and I have it right here, in Antiquities of the Jews, he speaks about, well, let's see it right here for a second. This desolation of the ground. Judas assembled, been told that many victories which God made Jerusalem. Therefore, they made of gold. You know what? We'll read about this afterwards. Okay, we'll look at Josephus afterwards. So, where were we? Yeah. And gave light in the temple, verse 51, and they set the loaves upon the table and hung up the veils and finished all the works that they had begun to make. And they rose before the morning on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is the month of Kislev, right? 25th day of Kislev. That's when Channukah is celebrated to this day. In the 148th year, that's the 148th year of the Greek, in the Greek calendar, meaning since the Greeks took over. And they offered sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar of holocausts, which they had made, according to the time and according to the day wherein the heathens had defiled it. Meaning, on the 25th day of the 9th month, it says earlier in the Book of Maccabees, that's when the Greeks had defiled the Temple Mount. Okay, that's when they had if I remember correctly, that's when they put their when they put I think the first Book of Maccabees, or the second Book of Maccabees calls it the abomination of desolation. That's where they put their idol up, or it might have been just where they broke into the temple. I'd have to look early in the Book of Maccabees. It escapes me at the moment. At any rate, what it's mentioned specifically on the 25th day of the 9th month of Kislev, that's when the Greeks had first defiled the temple. In the same was it dedicated anew with canticles and harps and lutes and cymbals. And all the people fell upon their faces and adored and blessed up to heaven him that had prospered them. Notice, again, no mention of any miracle here. And they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days. Okay? And they offered holocausts, burnt offerings with joy, and sacrifices of salvation and of praise. So here we have that they kept this dedication. They rededicated the altar here, right? They made a new altar. They threw out the old altar, which the Greeks had defiled, and they brought in a new altar. They made a new altar, and here they're celebrating, or they're keeping a celebration of the dedication of the altar for 8 days. And they offered holocausts, burnt offerings with joy, and sacrifices of salvation and of praise. And they adorned the front of the temple with crowns of gold and escutcheons, I believe that means shields, and they renewed the gates and sure it does. In fact, I know enough. Okay, I don't know. Because I think it's related to the Portuguese word escudo, which means which was the currency of Portugal and means shield. So escutcheons, I believe, means shields. And they renewed the gates and the chambers and hanged doors upon them, new wooden doors. And there was exceeding great joy among the people, and the reproach of the Gentiles was turned away. And Judas and his brethren and all the congregation, it says church, but it means congregation of Israel, decreed that the day of the dedication of the altar should be kept in its season from year to year for 8 days, from the 25th, 5 and 20th day of the month of Kislev, with joy and gladness. So here we go. This is exactly Judas and his brethren, right? So there was Simon, there was Judas, there was Simon, there was Eliezer, and who's the other one? I can't remember. Jonathan? I can't remember. At any rate, so here Judas and his brother Judas and the Maccabees and his brothers, right? The father Mattathias, Mattathias is already dead, and so here Judas and his brothers lay down the obligation to keep this celebration, this dedication of the altar, right? This Channukah of the altar each year for 8 days, starting from the 25th day of Kislev. Just as Mordechai and Esther sent letters in the book at the end of the book of Esther, it speaks about how they sent 2 letters around to the people, basically imploring them, or basically making them swear that they would keep Purim from year to year. So it's the same thing. So if we can listen to if Mordechai and Esther can lay down a holiday that we follow throughout the generations, and also Judas can. Judah Hamaccabee, Yehuda Hamaccabee can, and his brothers can as well. So here we have that the verse that shows that Hanukkah was laid down by the Maccabees themselves as a celebration from year to year. So that, for me, is enough reason to keep it. Okay, it's not based on Torah. I mean, it's not a Torah commandment, but just as we keep Purim, so we can keep also Hanukkah. They built up also at the time Mount Zion, with high walls and strong towers about, lest the Gentiles should at any time come and tread it down as they did before. And he placed a garrison there to keep it, and he fortified it to secure Bathsheba, that the people might have a defense against Idumea, against the descendants of Esau. And that's it. So 2 things that we can take from this is, number one, as we know, as it's mentioned often in Karaite circles, there's no mention of any kind of Hanukkah miracle, of any kind of oil miracle lasting for 8 days here. Okay, what we do have is that as the new vessels for the reestablished temple were being made, then one of them happened to be the candlestick, the menorah. This is so interesting. Oh, I didn't know that was clickable. Okay. And that they lighted up the lamps that were upon the candlestick, and they gave light in the temple. That's all that's said about it, right? And then we know that the dedication of the altar is kept for 8 days. It's explained more in the second book of Maccabees why it's for 8 days. Basically, because they were fighting. They were fighting during Sukkot time against the Greeks, and they couldn't celebrate Sukkot, which is 8 days, including Shmini Atzeret, properly. So one of the reasons they kept it was for 8 days. Okay, there were other reasons as well. And then here in the first book of Maccabees, chapter 4, verse 59, Judah Maccabee and his brothers basically decree or lay down for all of Israel that this holiday should be kept from year to year. So there's a lot of talk among Karaite circles that you shouldn't keep Hanukkah because the rabbis made up the oil miracle, or they made up the Hanukkah menorah and the oil miracle and all this kind of stuff. But the fact of the matter is, let's change this a second. When the congregation will change it. And this is First Maccabees 1 Maccabees, and this is 459. 459, yes. What happened? There we go. That's better. So we see that Hanukkah was laid down by the Maccabees themselves, and just as Purim was laid down by Mordechai together with Esther, and is kept from year to year by the Jews. So I see that I don't see any reason not to keep Hanukkah starting on the 25th day of the 9th month. Okay. As for lighting the Hanukkah menorah, well, it says that it should be kept here. So what did Judah and his brothers say that should be done? It should be kept for 8 days, starting on the 25th day of Kislev, and it should be kept with joy and gladness. So what does that mean? And I guess it just means have special meals and maybe have people over for meals and some dancing and some singing and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't explain it any further. Just that it should be remembered for 8 days in a joyful way around this time of the year. Okay, so that's that. We can look at Josephus. Josephus is now writing right around the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, so approximately 70 or so CE, a little bit before, and he speaks also about the Hanukkah, and this is what he says, and this is in Antiquities of the Jews, and this is book 12, chapter 7, section 6. That's what this 12:7:6 means here. It says, wherefore the generals of Antiochus's armies had been beaten so often, Judas assembled the people together and told them that after these many victories which God had given them, they ought to go up to Jerusalem and purify the temple and offer appointed sacrifices. But as soon as he, with the whole multitude, was come to Jerusalem and found the temple deserted and its gates burnt down, and plants growing in the temple of their own accord on account of its desertion, he and those that were with him began to lament and were quite confounded at the sight of the temple. So he chose out some of his soldiers and gave them order to fight against those guards that were in the citadel until he should have purified the temple. When therefore he had carefully purged it and had brought new vessels, the candlestick, the table, and the altar of incense, right? So that's exactly what it says in the Book of Maccabees, which were made of gold. He hung up the veils at the gates and added doors to them. It's straight out of the Book of Maccabees, we saw that. He also took down the altar. One second. Here, hang doors upon them, right? It's basically, this is coming straight out of the Book of Maccabees. Which were made of gold. He hung up the veils at the gates and added doors to them. He also took down the altar of burnt offering and built a new one of stones that he gathered together, and not of such as were hewn with iron tools. Again, straight out of chapter 4 of the first book of Maccabees. I'm not saying that's exactly where he got it from, although it's very possible. I'm just saying it's a repetition of exactly what's stated in the first book of Maccabees at the end of chapter 4. So on the 5 and 20th day of the month of Kislev, which the Macedonians call Appelians, they lighted the lamps that were on the candlestick. No mention. And remember now, this is approximately 150, approximately close to 250 years, close to 250 years after the events of Hanukkah took place, and still no mention whatsoever of some kind of oil miracle. And offered incense upon the altar of incense, and laid the loaves upon the table of showbread, and offered burnt offerings upon the new altar of burnt offering. Now it so fell out that these things were done on the very same day on which their divine worship had fallen off, and was reduced to profane and common use after 3 years' time. So that's saying it's that same day, the 25th of Kislev, when the temple was first defiled. For so it was that the temple was made desolate by Antiochus, and so continued for 3 years. This desolation happened to the temple in the 145th year, on the 25th day of the month of Appelians, and on the 153rd Olympiad. But it was dedicated new on the same day, the 25th of the month of Appelians, or Kislev, on the 148th year, on the 100 blah, 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 and this desolation came blah, 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 blah. Okay, I want to find where, let's move to the next one. That's where it is. Yeah. So now Judas, this is now still Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus. And it says, now Judas celebrated the festival of the restoration. Let's make this a little larger. Of the sacrifices of the temple for 8 days, and omitted no sort of pleasures thereon, but he feasted them upon very rich and splendid sacrifices. And he honored God and delighted them by hymns and psalms. Nay, they were so very glad at the revival of their customs, when after a long time of intermission, meaning the 3 years, they unexpectedly had regained the freedom of their worship, and they made it a law for their posterity that they should keep a festival on account of the restoration of their temple worship for 8 days. And from that time to this, we celebrate this festival and call it Lights. Okay, so it's called Lights. That's something new. It doesn't say that in the Book of Maccabees, Lights. But on the other hand, what does Josephus say about this? He says, I suppose the reason was because this liberty beyond our hopes appeared to us, and that thence was the name given to that festival. So he says it's called Lights because it's the light of liberty, right? It's the light of freedom, the light at the end of the dark tunnel. It says nothing again about some kind of oil miracle, and this is now 250 years later. This is after the Pharisees are quite established. In fact, they're making their move through the Romans on the temple, and basically, the temple's now going to be destroyed, putting the Sadducees out of business permanently. And so the Pharisees are well established, and their oral law is well established. And so, if it's reasonable to assume that if this was a tradition dating back earlier than the time of Josephus, he would have mentioned something about the oil miracle, but there's no mention of the oil miracle whatsoever. Judas also rebuilt the walls around the city and reared towers of great height against the incursions of the enemies and set guards therein. He also fortified the city Bethshur. That's again coming out of the Book of Maccabees. We just saw this, that it might serve as a citadel against any distress that might come from our enemies. So there's a brief introduction. There's a lot more to be said, obviously. Okay, I mean, we could sit here and what?
What part are you going?
You're just gonna have to listen in, okay? You're right in the middle of studies, so just listen, okay? So so there's a lot more to say about that, but that's a very brief introduction, okay? If we have more time at the end of the study, I will get back to it and we can delve more into the Book of Maccabees. We can try to see why it was an 8-day festival that's mentioned in the second Book of Maccabees, and a whole bunch of other interesting stuff. But I do want to get to the Parsha. I want to get to this week's Parsha. So let's do that. Okay, so we're going to go now to Genesis chapter 41. As I've been doing in these studies, I'll continue to do it. I'm going to first go through the Parsha completely in Hebrew with little to no commentary, just once through. Okay, if you want to follow along in your favorite English translation, please feel free to go ahead and do that. And then once we get through, then we'll go back and we can discuss specific issues in the in this week's portion. So, any questions? Any comments? Do you guys who are listening, do you want to do more Book of Maccabees? Do you want me to focus more on the Book of Maccabees this week, or do you want to focus more on the Torah portion? Both are equally fascinating. It goes without saying. So the miracle was made up by the rabbis, says Jacob. Yes, the miracle was made up by the rabbis. Absolutely, without a doubt. I should all point you to my article. Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody want to say something? I hear a voice in the wilderness.
Oh, no. I just
Okay. Well, if you
I
want
was
to,
just turning on
Yep.
turning on the
I'm
mic.
sorry. Go ahead. Okay, no problem. I'm going to mute you. If you want to say something, you're more than welcome to. Just let me know. Okay. All right. So, the article where I write a lot of this stuff down is this article here called My Channukah, which is a play on the words that's used in the Talmud to introduce the laws on Hanukkah, or discussion about Hanukkah, I should say. So I'll just put this up. Do you believe the Book of Maccabees is true? Well, one second here. Let me get this. So if you follow that link, you can pull it off of the comments as well. Then that sums things up a bit more. Do I believe the Book of Maccabees is true? Well, it depends what you mean by true, and it depends what you mean by the Book of Maccabees. So maybe we'll spend a little bit more time on this. So the Book of Maccabees is actually 4 books. Let's go to Dr. Wikipedia. Places any to find out a bit more. Okay. And let's learn a little bit about the Book of Maccabees. So the Book of Maccabees, or Sefer HaMaccabim, recounts the history of the Maccabees, the leaders of the Jewish one second. The leaders of the Jewish rebellion against the Seleucid dynasty. The Book of Maccabees refers to a series of deuterocanonical books contained in various canons of the Bible. So this first Maccabees, originally written in Hebrew and surviving only in a Greek translation, relates the history of the Maccabees from 175 BCE to 134 BCE. Second Maccabees, a Greek abridgment by Jason of Cyrene, and this person is mentioned. He mentions himself basically at the beginning of the second book of Maccabees. Of an earlier history in Hebrew, relates the history of the Maccabees from 176 BCE down to 161 BCE, focusing on Judas Maccabeus, discussing praying for the dead and offerings. 3 Maccabees, a Greek narrative that professes a historical account of Egyptian Jews being delivered from impending martyrdom at the hands of Ptolemy IV Philopator. So 3rd Maccabees has actually nothing to do whatsoever with the Hanukkah story. 4 Maccabees, a philosophic discourse pursuing the supremacy of reason over passion, using the Maccabean martyrs as examples. So again, this has nothing to do with it. And 5 Maccabees, in Arabic language history from 186 to 6 BCE. The same title is used for Syriac version of the 6th book of Josephus' Jewish Wars. And on and on and on. So the first 2 books of Maccabees are considered canonical by the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. The others are considered to be apocrypha. So let's see here. The first verse, second book of Maccabees. The books of first and second Maccabees offer similar accounts. The authors display notably different literary styles. The narratives are similar. In first Maccabees, the author offers a sober historical account of the persecution of the Jews under Antiochus IV. In contrast, the author of the second book presents a heavily dramatic and theologically dense account of a shorter but overlapping time period. The second author depicts martyrs alongside Judas Maccabeus as champions, earning divine favor as a result. The author of First Maccabees presents an objective and sober account, taking influence from the authors of the Hebrew Bible, etc., etc. It's kind of repeating itself. So really, the only 2 historical accounts that we have here in the Book of Maccabees are First Maccabees and Second Maccabees. Okay, so are they true? They both attempt to be historical accounts. Okay, we don't know who the author of First Maccabees is. Okay. We have it only in Greek, I mean, and Second Maccabees also in Greek, but at the beginning of the second book of Maccabees, the author identifies himself as this Jason of Cyrene. Okay, so as much as histories and it's not clear exactly when these books were written, but soon after the events, it seems. So in terms of if you can consider a history book written by someone to be, or written by 2 different people, again, the second was an abridgment of an earlier history written in Hebrew, to be true, then I think the book Maccabees to be true. It does overlap between Maccabees and the second Maccabees, and both come from different authors relating the event in that the Book of Maccabees. So that's that. Should we learn a little bit more about First Maccabees? So the Book of Maccabees, First Maccabees, is written in Hebrew by an anonymous Jewish author after the restoration in the Jewish kingdom has done, 2nd century BC. Version is the Greek translation contained in the Septuagint, right? So these books were part of the that's how they survived, basically. The book is held canonical scripture by the Catholic, Orthodox, and Oriental churches, but not by Protestant denominations nor any major branches. Some Protestants consider it to be an apocryphal book, etc. Yeah, let's go further. No, the early revolt, Lucid Empire, the recapture of Jerusalem in the year 60 BC, dedicated the Second Temple, the narrative of the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. But that's one understanding. This is the revolt. He's the third son of Matyahu. The name was which counts of book. Yeah, I don't. We need to make a long story. It's a history, and it attempts both basically detailed event of that time. Okay, it is a history, and we can, or any history be true. I would say first and second Maccabees and these. So it could be also. I mean, read about in that history, but I think is basically it's true. Okay, so yes, first and second best. Okay, let's go to this report and I'm going to read it through. Any other questions before you can come in? You can come in, and if you're in the if not, then we are going to screen the Miketz. Okay, and the whole Hebrew following in English, or if you want to read the Hebrew, you can follow along with the Hebrew. So I'll tell you what verse we're in, and then we'll go and a bit more. Okay. So and let's get a context from the previous week. So we have the story with the cupbearer and the baker, right? Joseph had encountered the cupbearer, the Sara Mashkim, and the baker in prison, and both had had a dream. Both had had a similar dream, and they asked Yosef to interpret it, and Yosef interprets it correctly. He says that the Sara Mashkim, the cupbearer, will be taken out of jail in 3 days and return to his position as cupbearer, and that the baker, the head of the bakers, would be taken out of prison and have says to the cupbearer, when you get out of prison, please remember me to Pharaoh so that he can get me out of this place. It said, verse 3, this is Genesis 40, not the cup did not for Yosef, rather he for him. Okay, so he's still stuck in jail. The Pharaoh is back in his position with Pharaoh, and the baker, the head baker, and Cantic is dead. Okay, so 1 second here. We said it. Joseph. Too much. Second. I just want something. יאמרו אליו חלום חלום ויאמר עליהם okay, so he offers to correctly. Now it's years later, and here in chapter 1 verse, I read only in Hebrew. So ויהי מקץ שנתיים ימים ופרעה חולם והנה עומד על היאור. Verse 2. והנה מן האור יפות ואנה באהו. This is true. I always put it up right now. All right. והנה, 7 פרות אחריהם בשר ותאכלנה הפרות רעות המראה ודקות הבשר את 7 הפרות יפות המראה והבריאות ויקץ פרעה. Verse 5, וישן ויחלום שנית והנה 7 שיבלים עולות בקנה אחד בריאות וטובות והנה 7 שיבלים דקות ושדופות קדים צומחות אחריהם ותבלענה השיבלים הדקות את 7 השיבלים הבריאות והמלאות ויקץ פרעה והנה חלום. Verse 8 ויהי בבוקר ותפעם רוחו וישלח ויקרא את כל חכמי מצרים ואת כל חכמיה ויספר פרעה להם את חלומו ואין פותר אותם לפרעה. By the way, just very quickly, it says he called all of the magicians or all the wise men of Egypt. It uses the same word Chaktumim. The Chaktumim are the same ones that that Pharaoh at the time of Moses later calls to duplicate the plagues, the signs that Moses is showing to him. Just use of the word Chaktumim. Verse 9. וידבר שר המשקים את פרעה לאמור את חטאי אני מזכיר היום. פרעה קצף על עבדיו וייתן אותי במשמר בית שר הטבחים אותי ואת שר האופים ונחלמה חלום בלילה אחד אני והוא איש כפתרון חלומו חלמנו ושם איתנו נער עברי עבד לשר הטבחים ונספר לו ויפתר לנו את Sorry, I just heard screaming. Okay. Everything's okay out there. ויפתר לנו את חלומותינו איש כחלומו. I'm sorry, just give me 1 second. I'm sorry, we just had a little cat crisis. I'll be right back. Come. Come, sir. Take him in the other room, okay? Take him in the other room. Zoof is outside. Here, take him in the other room.
I know she is.
Okay, so now I'm doing the study. All right, so now you finish the study. All right, that's it.
You heard me?
I heard you screaming. Okay. Okay, it's no big deal. Nothing happened. Okay, sorry about that. Nothing. All right, we're back. Okay. Okay. So, where were we? Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so let's start in verse 8. ויהי בבוקר ותפעם רוחו וישלח ויקרא את כל חכמי מצרים ואת כל חכמיה ויספר פרעה להם את חלומו ואין פותר אותם לפרעה. Verse 9. וידבר שר המשקים את פרעה לאמור את חטאי אני מזכיר היום. Verse 10. פרעה קצף על עבדיו וייתן אותי במשמר בית שר הטבחים אותי ואת שר האופים clean blood from cat scratch. It's a long story, but it's nothing. Okay. Sarah Ofim, verse 11. נחלמה חלום בלילה אחד, אני והוא איש כפתרון חלומו, חלמנו. verse 12. ושם איתנו נער עברי, עבד לשר הטבחים, ונספר לו ויפתר לנו את חלומותינו, איש כחלומו פתר. verse 13. ויהי כאשר פתר לנו, כן היה אותי, השיב על קני, ואותו תלה. verse 14. So we're in Genesis 41, verse 14. וישלח פרעה ויקרא את יוסף, ויריצוהו מן הבור, ויגלח, ויחלף סמלותיו, ויבוא אל פרעה, ויאמר פרעה אל יוסף, חלום חלמתי, פותר אין אותו, ואני שמעתי עליך לאמור, תשמע חלום לפתור אותו. יען יוסף את פרעה לאמור, בעדי אלוהים יענה את שלום פרעה. verse 17. וידבר פרעה אל יוסף בחלומי, הנני עומד על שפת היאור, והנה מן היאור עולות 7 פרות בריאות בשר, יפות תואר, ותראינה באחו. verse 19. והנה 7 פרות אחרות עולות אחריהם, דלות ורעות תואר מאוד, ורקות בשר, לא ראיתי כהנה בכל ארץ מצרים לרע. מתאכלנה הפרות הרכות, והרעות את 7 הפרות הראשונות הבריאות. verse 21. ותבואנה אל קרבנה, ולא נודע כי באו אל קרבנה, ומראיהם רע כאשר בתחילה ויקץ. verse 22. ואראה בחלומי, והנה 7 שיבלים עולות בקנה אחד, מלאות וטובות, והנה 7 שיבלים צנומות, דקות שדופות קדים צומחות אחריהם, ותבלענה השיבלים הדקות את 7 השיבלים הטובות, ואמר אל החרטומים, ואין מגיד לי. ויאמר יוסף אל פרעה, חלום פרעה אחד הוא, את אשר האלוהים עושה, יגיד לפרעה. verse 26. 7 פרות הטובות 7 שנים הנה, ו7 השיבלים הטובות 7 שנים הנה. חלום אחד הוא, ו7 הפרות הרכות והרעות העולות אחריהם 7 שנים הנה, ו7 השיבלים הריקות שדופות הקדים יהיו 7 שני רעב. הוא הדבר אשר דיברתי אל פרעה, אשר האלוהים עושה, הראה את פרעה. הנה 7 שנים באות, 7 גדול, הסבה גדול, בכל ארץ מצרים. קמו 7 שני רעב אחריהם, ונשכח כל הסבה בארץ מצרים, וכילה הרעב את הארץ. ולא יוודע הסבה בארץ מפני הרעב ההוא אחרי כן, כי כבד הוא מאוד. verse 32. ועל הישנות החלום, על הישנות החלום אל פרעה פעמיים, כי נכון הדבר מעם האלוהים, וממהר האלוהים לעשותו. verse 33. ועתה ירא פרעה איש נבון וחכם, וישיתהו על ארץ מצרים. יעשה פרעה ויפקד פקידים על הארץ, וחימש את ארץ מצרים ב7 שני הסבה, ויקבצו את כל אוכל השנים הטובות הבאות האלה, ויצברו בר תחת יד פרעה אוכל בערים ושמרו. והיה האוכל לפיקדון לארץ ל7 שני הרעב אשר תהיינה בארץ מצרים, ולא תחרט הארץ ברעב. verse 37, I mean. We're in chapter 41, Genesis chapter 41, verse 37. ויטב הדבר בעיני פרעה ועיני כל עבדיו. verse 38. יאמר פרעה אל עבדיו, הנמצא כזה איש אשר רוח אלוהים בו? ויאמר פרעה אל יוסף, אחרי הודיע אלוהים אותך את כל זאת, אין נבון וחכם כמוך. אתה תהיה על ביתי ועל פיך יישק כל עמי רק הכיסא אגדל ממך. וואי אומר פרעה אל יוסף, ראה נתתי אותך על כל ארץ מצרים, ויסר פרעה את טבעתו מעל ידו, וייתן אותה על יד יוסף, וירבש אותו בגדי שש, וישם רביד הזהב על צווארו, וירכב אותו במרכבת המשנה אשר לו, ויקראו לפניו אברך, ונתון אותו על כל ארץ מצרים. ויאמר פרעה אל יוסף, אני פרעה, ובלעדיך לא ירים איש את ידו ואת רגלו בכל ארץ מצרים. ויקרא פרעה שם יוסף צפנה פנח, ויתן לו את אסנת בת פוטיפרה כהן און לאישה, ויצא יוסף על ארץ מצרים. Ooh, a lot to say about that, but we'll get to it hopefully. Verse 46, ויוסף בן 30 שנה. Let's make sure everything's here. Good is here. Michael Schoenberg. Okay. Let's, what should we do with him? Okay. So where were we? Yeah, I think he's going to just be a disruption thing. I'll chuck this guy out here. Okay. So, where were we? Yomer paro el Yosef re'e natati otcha. No, we already read that. V'yasar paro et tabato v'yatur. Yomer paro el Yosef, ani paro beladecha lo yarim ish et yado vet raglo bechol eretz Mitzrayim. יקרא פרעה שם יוסף צפנה פנח, ויתן לו את אסנת בת פוטיפרה כהן עוד לאישה, יצא יוסף על ארץ מצרים. 7 years of plenty. So we're now in Genesis chapter 41 verse 46. Why יוסף בן 30 שנה, ויוסף בן 30 שנה בעמדו לפני פרעה מלך מצרים, ויצא יוסף מלפני פרעה, ויעבור בכל ארץ מצרים. ותעש הארץ בשבע שני הסבה לקמצים, ויקבוץ את כל אוכל 7 שנים אשר היו בארץ מצרים, ויתן אוכל בערים, אוכל שדה העיר אשר סביבותיה נתן בתוכה, ויצפור יוסף בר ככל הים הרבה מאוד, עד כי חדל לספור כי אין מספר. And we're in Genesis chapter 41 verse 50. וליוסף יולד 2 בנים, בטרם תבוא שנת רעב אשר ילדה לו אסנת בת פוטיפרה כהן און, ויקרא יוסף את שם הבכור מנשה, כי נשני אלוהים את כל עמלי ואת כל בית אבי, ואת שם השני קרא אפרים, כי הפרני אלוהים בארץ עניי. verse 53, ותכלנה 7 שני הסבה אשר היה בארץ מצרים, ותכלנה 7 שני הרעב לבוא כאשר אמר יוסף, ויהי רעב בכל הארצות ובכל ארץ מצרים, היה לחם. verse 55, ותרעב כל ארץ מצרים, ויצעק העם אל פרעה ללחם, ויאמר פרעה לכל מצרים, לכו אל יוסף אשר יאמר לכם תעשו. verse 56, והרעב היה על כל פני הארץ, ויפתח יוסף את כל אשר בהם, וישבור למצרים, ויחזק הרעב בארץ מצרים. וכל הארץ באו מצרימה, לשבור אל יוסף, כי חזק הרעב בכל הארץ. Genesis chapter 42. ירא יעקב, כי יש שבר במצרים. ויאמר יעקב לבניו, למה תתראו? ויאמר, הנה שמעתי כי יש שבר במצרים, רדו שמה, ושברו לנו משם, ונחיה ולא נמות. וירדו אחי יוסף 10 לשבור בר במצרים, ממצרים. verse 4, ואת בנימין אחי יוסף לא שלח יעקב את אחיו, כי אמר פן יקראנה אסון, יבואו בני ישראל לשבור בתוך הבאים, כי היה הרעב בארץ כנען. ויוסף הוא השליט על הארץ, הוא המשביר לכל עם הארץ, ויבוא אחי יוסף וישתחו לו אפיים ארצה. וירא יוסף את אחיו ויכירם ויתנכר עליהם וידבר איתם קשות, יאמר עליהם מאין באתם, יאמרו מארץ כנען לשבור אוכל. ויכר יוסף את אחיו והם לא הכירוהו. verse 9, ויזכור יוסף את החלומות אשר חלם להם, יאמר עליהם מרגלים אתם לראות את ערוות הארץ באתם. ויאמרו אליו לא אדוני, ועבדיך באו לשבור אוכל. verse 11, Genesis chapter 2, 42 verse 11. כולנו בני איש אחד, אנחנו כנים, אנחנו לא היו עבדיך מרגלים. ויאמר עליהם לא כי ערוות הארץ באתם לראות. ויאמרו 12 עבדיך אחים אנחנו בני איש אחד, ובארץ כנען, והנה הקטון את אבינו היום, ואחד איננו. ויאמר עליהם יוסף, הוא אשר דיברתי עליכם לאמור, מרגלים אתם, בזאת תבחנו, חי פרעה, אם תצאו מזה, כי אם בבוא אחיכם הקטון הנה. שלחו מכם אחד, ויקח את אחיכם, ואתם העשרו יבחנו, דבריכם האמת איתכם, אם לא, חי פרעה, כי מרגלים אתם, לסוף אותם אל משמר 3 ימים. verse 18, ויאמר עליהם יוסף ביום השלישי, זאת עשו, חיו את האלוהים אני ירא. אם כנים אתם, אחיכם אחד יאסר בבית משמרכם, ואתם לכו הביאו שבר רעבון בתיכם, ואת אחיכם הקטון תביאו אליי, ויאמנו דבריכם ולא תמותו, ויעשו כן. verse 21, יאמרו איש אל אחיו, אבל אשמים אנחנו על אחינו אשר ראינו צרת נפשו בהתחננו אלינו ולא שמענו, על כן באה אלינו הצרה הזאת. verse 22, ויען ראובן אותם לאמור, הלא אמרתי עליכם לאמור אל תחטאו בילד, ולא שמעתם, וגם דמו הנה נדרש. והם לא ידעו כי שומע יוסף, כי המליץ בין אותם. ויסוב מעליהם וישב עליהם וידבר עליהם, ויקח מאיתם את שמעון ויסור אותו לעיניהם. Okay. Oh, I don't have my apologies. It should be like this. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. So we are now in Genesis chapter 42, verse 25. ויצף יוסף ימלאו את כליהם בר ולהשיב כספיהם איש אל שקו לתת להם צידה לדרך, ויעש להם כן. ויישאו את שברם אל חמוריהם וילכו משם. ויפתח אחד את שקו לתת מספו לחמורו במלון, יער את כספו, והנה הוא בפי עם תחתו. ויאמר אל אחיו, הושב כספי וגם הנה בעם תחתי. יצא ליבם יחרדו איש אל אחיו לאמור, מה זאת עשה אלוהים לנו. verse 29, יבוא אל יעקב אביהם ארצה כנען, ויגידו לו את כל הקורות אותם לאמור, דיבר האיש אדוני הארץ איתנו קשות, ויתן איתנו כמרגלים. אותנו כמרגלים את הארץ. ואנו אומר אליו, כנים אנחנו לא היינו מרגלים, 12 אנחנו אחים, בני אבינו האחד, איננו, והקטון היום את אבינו בארץ כנען, ויאמר אלינו האיש אדוני הארץ, בזאת אדע כי כנים אתם, אחיכם האחד, הניחו איתי ואת רעבון בתיכם קחו ולכו, verse 34, והביאו את אחיכם הקטון אליי, ואדעה כי לא מרגלים אתם, כי כנים אתם את אחיכם, אתן לכם, ואת הארץ תסחרו. verse 35, ויהי הם מריקים שקיהם, והנה איש צרור כספו בשקו, ויראו את צרורות כספיהם המה ואביהם ויראו, ויאמר עליהם יעקב אביהם, אותי שיקלתם יוסף איננו, ושמעון איננו, ואת בנימין תיקחו עלי, היו כולנה. ויאמר ראובן אל אביו לאמור, את שני בניי תמית, אם לא אביאנה אליך, תנה אותו על ידי, ואני אשיבנו אליך. ויאמר לא ירד בני עמכם, כי אחיו מת, והוא לבדו נשאר, וקראהו אסון בדרך אשר תלכו בו, והורדתם את שיבתי ביגון שאולה. Verse 43, I'm sorry, chapter 43. Let's check everything's okay here. Okay. So chapter 43, והרעב כבד בארץ, ויהי כאשר כילו לאכול את השבר אשר הביאו ממצרים, ויאמר עליהם אביהם, שובו שברו לנו מעט אוכל. ואומר אליו יהודה לאמור, העיד בנו האיש לאמור, לא תראו פניי, בלתי אחיכם איתכם. אם ישך משלח את תכינו איתנו, נרדה ונשפרה לך אוכל. ואם אינך משלח, לא נרד, כי האיש אמר אלינו, לא תראו פניי, בלתי אחיכם איתכם. verse 6, ויאמר ישראל, למה הראותם לי להגיד לאיש העוד לכם אח? ויאמרו שאול שאל האיש לנו ולמולדתנו לאמור העוד אביכם חי, היש לכם אח? ונגד לו על פי הדברים האלה, הידוע נדע כי יאמר הורידו את אחיכם? verse 8, יאמר יהודה אל ישראל אביו, שירך נער איתי ונקומה ונלכה נחיה ולא נמות, גם אנחנו גם אתה גם תפינו. אנוכי ערבנו מידי, תבקשנו אם אני ערבנו מידי, תבקשנו אם לא הביאותיו אליך והצגתיו לפניך, וחטאתי לך כל הימים, כי לולא התמה בנו, כי אתה שבנו זה פעמיים. verse 11, ויאמר עליהם ישראל אביהם, אם כן איפה זאת עשו, קחו מזמרת הארץ בכליכם, והורידו לאיש מנחה מעט צרי, מעט דבש, ניחות ולוט, בתנים ושקדים, וכסף משנה קחו בידכם, ואת כסף המושב בפי אמתחותיכם תשיבו בידכם, אולי משקהו, ואת אחיכם קחו וקומו שובו אל האיש, ואל שדי ייתן לכם רחמים לפני האיש, ושילח לכם את אחיכם אחר, ואת בנימין, ואני כאשר שקלתי. ויקחו האנשים את המנחה הזאת, ומשנה כסף לקחו בידם, ואת בנימין ויקומו וירדו מצרים, ויעמדו לפני יוסף. וירא יוסף איתם את בנימין, יאמר לאשר על ביתו, הבא את האנשים הביתה, וטבוח טבח, לכן כי איתי יאכלו אנשים בצהריים. ויעשה איש כאשר אמר יוסף, יבא האיש את האנשים ביתה יוסף, ויראו האנשים כי ובאו בית יוסף, ויאמרו על דבר הכסף השב בעם תחותינו, תחילה אנחנו מובאים להתגולל עלינו ולהתנפל עלינו, ולקחת אותנו לעבדים ואת המורנו. ויגשו אל האיש אשר על בית יוסף וידברו אליו פתח הבית, יאמרו בי אדוני, ירדנו בתחילה לשבור אוכל, ויהי כי באנו אל המלון ונפתחה את עם תחותינו, והנה כסף איש בפי עם תחותו, כספנו במשקלו, ונשב אותו בידינו. וכסף אחר הורדנו בידינו לשבור אוכל, לא ידענו מי שם כספנו בעם תחותינו. Verse 23, ויאמר שלום לכם, אל תראו אלוהיכם ואלוהי אביכם נתן לכם מטמון בעם תחותיכם, כספכם בא אליי ויוצא עליהם את שמעון. יבא האיש את האנשים ביתה יוסף ויתן מים ירחצו רגליהם וייתן מספו להמוריהם, ויכינו את המנחה עד בו יוסף בצהריים, כי שם יאכלו לחם. ויבוא יוסף הביתה, יביאו לו את המנחה אשר בידם הביתה, וישתחו לו ארצה, וישאל להם לשלום, יאמר השלום אביכם הזקן, אשר אמרתם עודנו חי. Verse 28, ויאמר שלום לעבדך, לאבינו, עודנו חי, ויקדו וישתחוו, וישא עיניו ירא את בנימין אחיו, בן אמו, ויאמר הזה אחיכם הקטון, אשר אמרתם אליי, ויאמר אלוהים יחנך בני. וימהר יוסף כי נחמרו רחמיו אל אחיו, ויבקש לבכות, ויבוא החדרה, ויפח שמה. Verse 31, וירחץ פניו, ויצא, ויתאפק, ויאמר שימו לכם, ושימו לו לבדו, ולהם לבדם, ולמצרים האוכלים איתו לבדם, כי לא יוכלון המצרים לאכול את העברים לחם, כי תועבה היא למצרים. וישבו לפניו הבחור כבחורתו, הצעיר כצעירתו, ותימהו האנשים איש אל רעהו. ויתמהו האנשים איש אל רעהו, וישא מסעות מאת פניו עליהם, ותרב מסעת בנימין ממסעות כולם 5 ידות, וישתו וישכרו עמו. Chapter 44. ויצב את אשר על ביתו לאמור, מלא את אמתחות האנשים אוכל כאשר יאכלון, את ושים כסף איש בפי אמתחתו, את גביעה הכסף תשים בפי אמתחת הקטון, ואת כסף שברו, ויעש כדבר יוסף אשר דיבר. הבוקר אור והאנשים שולחו המה והמוריהם, הם יצאו את העיר לא ירחיקו, ויוסף אמר לאשר על ביתו, קום רדוף אחרי האנשים, והשיגתם, ואמרת אליהם, למה שילמתם רעה תחת טובה? הלא זה אשר ישתה אדוני בו, והוא ינחש בו, הרי אותם אשר עשיתם. Verse 6. וישיגם וידבר עליהם את הדברים האלה, ויאמרו אליו, למה ידבר אדוני כדברים האלה? חלילה לעבדך מעשות כדבר הזה, הן כסף אשר מצאנו בפי תחותינו, השיבינו אליך מארץ כנען, ואיך נגנוב מבית אדונך כסף או זהב. אשר ימצא איתו מעבדיך ומת, וגם אנחנו נהיה לאדוני לעבדים. ויאמר גם אתה, כי דבריכם כן, הוא אשר ימצא איתו יהיה לי עבד, ואתם תהיו נקיים. Verse 11. וימהרו, יותירו, ויורידו איש את אמתחתו ארצה, ויפתחו איש אמתחתו, יחפש בגדול, יחל, ובקטון קילה, וימצא הגביע באמתחת בנימין, ויקרעו סמלותם, ויעמוס איש על חמרו, וישובו העירה. ויבוא יהודה ואחיו בית יוסף, והוא עודנו שם, ויפלו לפניו ארצה. יאמר להם יוסף, מה המעשה הזה אשר עשיתם? הלא ידעתם כי ינחש איש אשר כמוני? יאמר יהודה, מה נאמר לאדוני, מה נדבר ומה נצטדק? האלוהים מצא את עוון עבדיך. הנה עבדים לאדוני, גם אנחנו, גם אשר נמצא הגביע בידו. יאמר חלילה לי מעשות זאת, האיש אשר נמצא הגביע בידו, הוא יהיה לי עבד, ואתם עלו לשלום אל אביכם. Okay, so that's the end of the parsha. I'm going to take a break for just a couple of minutes, just drink some water. And what we'll do after this is, if you have any specific questions or comments, then we can start with those. If not, I will go through some of the parsha on my own, and we won't get through the whole thing, but we'll do about another hour and a half or so, and we can approach it that way. So if you have any specific questions, then let me know. Okay. So let's see. I'll put up a song for a second. How about? And I'll be back in about less than 5 minutes. Taking a break for a couple minutes. Okay, so we are back. So let's get down to business here. So are there any questions regarding this week's partial? Let me just change the sharing situation here. And let's see. Do this, window, and we're good to go. Okay. So there we have it. Okay, so if there are no specific questions, then I'm going to start going through the Parsha. And if anybody has questions, you can just either chat, you can write a comment, or you can, the best way to do it is to come onto this Streamyard, and then you can actually participate fully. So let's see what we have here. So there was something that I noticed that I'd never noticed before, and I'm going to start with that. If we go back one chapter, so let me just find it here for a second. Miketz, Yavo Yosef Habayta, Yavo Lo, Elamit Chasher Biyadam Habayta Vishtakunu Alehem Nishalom Yomer. No, not quite yet. Right, it's over here. One second. Wait, where did it go? No, no, not quite yet. Let's see. One second here. No, where did that go? No, it's back here. Wait. Oh, I can't find it. It's gonna be one more second here. Here it is. Okay. So it says here, this is Genesis chapter 3, verse 32. And what does it say? Okay, so this is now the brothers are coming in to be seated for lunch with Yosef. Okay. Let's start over here. And I'll translate this time to go into more depth. Yavo Yosef Habayta. So Yosef is now, before they dealt with the head of the household, I mean, Yosef's I guess butler kind of thing, or is the head of his household. Yavo Yosef Habayta, and now Yosef is coming to the house. So, and they brought to him the gifts, the gift that they had in their hands. Remember, their father Yaakov had told them earlier to bring gifts, and he gave them lot and shchelet and all kinds of herbs and spices and nuts and stuff like that. So now he gives it to them. And they bowed down before him. Okay, so here the dream is coming true, right? Remember how the brothers were so upset that Yosef had dreamed a dream that that the 12 stars and the sun and the moon would be bowing down before him, right? This is what started the whole story. And now here, this is, well, the whole thing's not coming to true, right? There are not 11 stars, because bowing down to Yosef. There are not 11 people bowing down to him here, because at this point, well, let's just think about this. Maybe there are. But they already brought out Shimon. And if so, that would be all 11 brothers, because Binyamin was with them at this time. So I guess it is. But the father and the mother, right? It also included the moon, the sun and the moon. The sun representing Jacob, his father, and Rachel, his mother, is already dead. So that part of the dream certainly didn't come true. But here we have the brothers bowing down before Yosef, right? And then remember, he had another dream about the shibolets, the sheaves, also bowing down. Right, there were two dreams. So at any rate, this is now actually coming true. Yosef, what he dreamed in his dream, okay, what he saw in his vision is now actually coming true many years later. Okay, the 11 brothers are bowing down before Yosef. So this is a sign that the story is coming full circle, we could say. Okay. And he asked them, literally, he asked to them of peace or for peace, asked them how they were doing, basically. And he said, how is your, literally, is there peace to your father? Or Hashalom Avichem. Basically, how is your father doing? Is your father okay? Your elderly father, Asher Amartem Odenu Chai, who you told me is still alive, right? So Yosef is obviously very concerned about his father, and he emphasizes here Odenu Chai, right? That's what the brothers had told him previously. Okay, or he had asked, is your father still alive? And he said yes, and now he's repeating it. So he's I guess ensuring, or he's kind of confirming. He wants to confirm with the brothers that his father really still is alive, right? How is your father, who's still alive, right? Maybe he can't believe it, or he's so happy to hear about it, or he just wants confirmation that his father, who he loves and who loves him, is still alive. Verse 28, Shalom la'avinu. And they said, everything is fine. Literally, peace is to your servant, to our father. Odenu chai. Yes, he's still alive, right? Waichtu uishtachavu. And they bowed down and they prostrated. Okay, so So again, it's the fulfillment of the dream that Yosef had when he was 17 years old. And this is now many years later, right? Since he was taken out of prison when he was 30. And so this is sometime after that. We don't know exactly when, sometime in the famine, right? So it's 7 years of good. It was 7 years of good harvests and then 7 years of famine. So if he was taken out of the prison when he was 30, then the 7 years of the 7 good years have already passed. So that would have brought him to about the age of 37. And now we're somewhere in the 7 years of famine. So that would make him somewhere between 37 and 44 years old. So let's just take the average, 37 and 44. The average would actually be 40 and a half, right? 37 and 44. Did I do that right? 37, 44, 40, 30, 44, 74, 81. Yes, 40 and a half is half of 81. So it would be, let's say 40 or 41 years old. Let's say 40, he's about 40 years old. Okay. And when he dreamed the dream, or when he was taken away to Egypt, it says explicit he was 17 years old. Okay. So he spent 13 years in the jail. We know approximately, well, no, because he was with Potiphar for a little while. So I don't know. We don't know exactly how long that was, but he spent the maximum of 17 years in the jail. He was 13 years in the jail because he was 17 when he was taken down to Egypt. And now, given the timeline, he's approximately 40 years old, right? Give or take. Okay. So he hasn't seen his father since he was 17. He hasn't seen his father in about 23 years, right? About a quarter of a century, he hasn't seen his father. Okay. It's rough math. Okay, so what do we got here? So Waisa'inav Yara Binyamim. Okay, Yomru Shalom and Avtachas. Okay, like Tu Vishtachavu. So verse 29, Waisa'inav, and he lifted up his eyes. Yar et Binyamin. And by the way, this phrase "lifted up his eyes" is used very often. It really means took notice of. Okay, it literally says "Wayisa enav," and he and he lifted up his eyes. Just 1 second here. It's kind of a weird construction, actually. Because Einav is plural. Wayisa is singular. It's the future of the most basic form, what's called the pa'al form. So I never really understood Wayisa Einav. Do I want to explore that now? Or maybe I'll just do that on my own. Just grammatically speaking, because it should be I guess Isa. Why Isa? Laseit. I don't know what the hifil of laseit would be. Maybe that is the hifil form, but then there should be et. All right, I'm going to do that. I'm going to look at that on my own. I'm not going to bog us down here. It's always grammatically, I've always wondered about it. Okay, we are et binyamin achiv. Anyway, so suddenly he took notice. All right, so he saw Einav is a phrase that's used many, many, many times throughout the Tanakh. That someone, it doesn't mean that suddenly he sees, but suddenly he took notice of something. For instance, it says, I believe when Hagar is thrown out into the desert, it says she lifted up her eyes and noticed that there was a well there. Okay, the well was always there, but she suddenly paid attention to it. Her consciousness, or her conscience was brought into focus on that well. Same thing here. Binyamin was always sitting there, or had been sitting there, but suddenly Yosef realized, right? He paid attention to, he took notice of the fact. So maybe a good way to translate Yisa Inav, Yar et Binyamin, that he realized, I guess the whole thing of the phrase together. Literally, he lifted up his eyes and saw, but maybe he realized, that's a good way to translate that, at Binyamin Achiv, or recognized Binyamin Achiv, or took notice of Binyamin, his brother, Ben Imo, the son of his mother. And of course, it's pointing out here that Ben Imo, the son of his mother, because Binyamin is the only other son of Rachel, right? Rachel's now dead. She died on the road to Ephrat. That was in the previous parsha, right? And was buried there. So, so the only remembrance that Yosef has of his mother is Binyamin, right? And let's just think. So and Yosef certainly was alive when his mother died, because that was on Yaakov's way. Yaakov was going to Hebron. He was coming from Bet El, and he was going to Hebron, right? I think he'd gone from Haran to Sukkah, if I remember correctly, to Peniel, where he met Esav and fought with the angel. From Peniel, he went to Bet El. From Bet El, he went to Hebron, and on the way to Hebron, Rachel died. Okay, so where are we? Achi ben imo, yomer hazeh achichem hakaton, asher amartem elai, yomer Elohim. Okay, and then he says, almost, it seems like he's stunned almost. Is this your little brother who you spoke to me about? Who you told me about? Yomer Elohim yichancha b'ni, and he said, and he blesses him. The first thing he does with Binyamin is he blesses him. May God be kind to you, my son. Right? It's a beautiful blessing. It shows how much that Yosef felt love towards his little brother. Right? The only other child of his mother. Verse 30. V'yimaher Yosef ki nichmaru rachamav, and Yosef hurried up because nichmaru. I don't know this verb, so I want to look it up. Let's see where it's used. To grow warm and tender, kamar. To grow warm and tender, grow hot. Okay. So it occurs in 4 occurrences. So I don't know. It's not part of modern Hebrew, or at least not popular in modern Hebrew. Okay. Melech ki nichmaru rachameha. So 1 Kings. Reinu ketanur nichmaru mifnei zilafot. Libi yachad nichmaru nichumai. So they translate it as kindled. Orenu tanur nichmeru. Our skin, like an oven, nichmeru, became hot. Midnei zilafot. Okay, so I guess it means, yeah, warmed up, right? Hamelech ki nichmeru rachamav, that's rachamecha, rachameha, that's the same thing here. Nichmeru rachamav, so so nichmeru rachamav would seem to mean his rachamim means mercy, or feelings of mercy were warmed up, stirred up, they translate it as. Okay. A second. Okay, so just going to read through this one more time. Kamar, grow warm and tender, be or grow hot. Okay, make warm one's flesh or food. Prepare kemer, fermentation in modern Syria. Okay, nif'al, nifmeru, grow warm and tender, figurative. Subject, grow hot, orenu, tanur, nifmeru, amen. Okay, come on, following. Okay, all right, we get the idea. Okay, so if we go back here, Yemaher Yosef ki nichmeru rachamav. So this phrase means his mercies were warmed up, or he started getting sentimental, or starting becoming very emotional. Maybe would be the way to translate it. Okay. El achiv. So his mercy was stirred up towards his brother. Vayevakesh livkot, and he desired to cry. Yavo hadra shama. So he went into the back room. He went into a room literally, or the room, and cried there. V'yachatz panav, and he washed his face. V'yitapek, and he came back out, and then he controlled himself. V'yitapek, restrained himself. V'yomer simu lachem, and he said, put down bread. Okay. V'simu lo levado, and they, the servants that were there, put it down for him alone. Ulehem levadam, ulemitzrim ha'ochlim ito levadam. So here's the interesting. This is the verse that I wanted to point out before. So what it basically says is that so they put down bread for everybody, but he was seated alone. Yosef was seated alone. The brothers were seated alone, and the Egyptians that were eating with him, the mitzrim ha'ochlim ito levadam, were seated alone. So everyone was seated at different parts of the table. Why? Ki lo yichlun ha'mitzrim lechol et ha'ivrim, because the Egyptians could not eat together with the Hebrews. Lechem could not eat a meal or bread together with the Hebrews. Ki to'eva hi lemitzrim, because this was an abomination to the Egyptians. It was an abomination to the Egyptians to eat together with the Hebrews. So here's an interesting point. So does anyone see the point that I'm trying to make here, or the interesting thing that I see about here? Well, maybe it's too obscure to be able to just pull it out, but something that I noticed for the first time when I was reading through this. Okay, so here are the brothers. They see that the Egyptians are not sitting together with Yosef, right? Everyone's sitting apart. They didn't see Yosef together with his brothers, obviously for obvious reasons, because he's the second in command, and they're just visitors and potential slaves. But Yosef is not seated together with the Egyptians. Now, isn't this something that the brothers might have noticed? They might have said, "Hey, why is this guy, not seated together with the rest of the Egyptians? He must somehow be different." Maybe they even knew about the tradition among the Egyptians that they would not sit with the Hebrews for whatever reason. I don't know exactly what the reason is. Although one could say that it's alluded to in the end of the book of Exodus. I'm sorry, not the end of the book of Exodus, in the end of the end of the book of Genesis, where Pharaoh settles Yaakov and the other brothers in Goshen because they were ro'etz on, because they were shepherds. They tended to sheep and goats, and this was considered. And maybe we should even look at that. At any rate, for whatever reason, the Hebrews are considered an abomination to the Egyptians. I would imagine that that this would be known by the other brothers, and if they were a little bit more aware or not so shell shocked at this point, maybe they would have picked up on the clue. Hey, this guy is is sitting separately from the rest of the Egyptians. He's definitely not one of them. And we know that the Egyptians, will not eat with the Hebrews for whatever reason. Maybe he's a Hebrew, and maybe they would put one and one together, and maybe they would even recognize the face a little bit, and maybe they would have been able to determine that was Yosef, and maybe putting it together with the fact that he keeps on asking, how's your father? Is your father still alive? Is your father still alive? Maybe if they hadn't been so shell shocked, then maybe they would have been able to figure this all out. I don't know. It's just speculation, but it definitely is interesting that Yosef is seated separately from the rest of the Egyptians, and that was that could have kind of been a hint right there. And now it is an abomination in the eyes of Orthodox Judaism to eat with the Egyptians. I'm not sure what the heck that means. Maybe we should say it's an abomination in the eyes of Orthodox Judaism to eat with. Oh, here's my good friend who will probably want to remain anonymous. So it's an abomination in the eyes of Orthodox Judaism to eat with anyone, any Jew, or any Jew who's not one of them, who's not Orthodox enough. Maybe they think of us as think of anyone who's not as quote unquote Orthodox as they are as Egyptians or as Goyim. They do. They literally do. Egyptians meaning Gentiles. Okay, good point. But it's even more than that, Facebook user, whatever your name is. Oh, and by the way, I should say that if you're commenting on Facebook, it will not show your name. So if you want your name known, then you should post it. For instance, if I might write something like this. Okay, so if you see it there, just put it up. So if you're coming in off of Facebook, then you should write your name at the beginning of the comment. If you want me to know who you are, if you don't, that's fine too. But if you want to associate your comment, if you want to identify yourself with a name, then please do that. Okay. At any rate, so what we see here is that there was definitely a hint that if the brothers were a little bit more aware, they would have picked up on the fact, hey, this guy is obviously not an Egyptian, because the rest of the Egyptians won't even sit down next to him, right? And okay, well, we made the point. Again, it's speculation, but there are some hints here that Yosef is who that maybe the brothers could have figured it out if they weren't in such a state of shock at the time. Okay. So, ito levadam ki lo yichlun hamitzrim lechol ki et העברים לכם כי תועבה היא למצרים. Verse 33. וישבו לפניו הבכור כבכורתו וצעיר כצעירתו. And and we wanted to look up, I'll go to that in 1 second. Let's go to that right now. So why did the Egyptians think that the Hebrews were an abomination? There's another indication of that in, it might even be the last chapter. No, not so fast. Not so fast. No, this is later when Jacob's already, but there we go. Yosef yeged leFaro v'yomer avi v'achim tzonam. Okay. Yeged leFaro v'yomer avi v'achai tzonam v'karam v'chol asher lehem ba'u me. I think it's probably right before this. Right, he tells his father. 1 second. Yehuda shalach lefanav el Yosef lehorot לפניו, Goshen, yes, no, it's going to be before this. These are the names. Jacob's journey to Egypt, Visan. No, I think it's even actually before this. Kol nishma bit Pharaoh. Revival Jacob. Yalu mitzvah yavok. 1 second. Yaakov Avim yagidu lo lemor od Yosef chai. Give me 1 second here. Shalach said no. It's after this. If I can't find it in a second, we'll just go on to something else. So Yisrael v'chol okay. V'yakam Yaakov mi Be'er Sheva Yisuf b'nei Midian. Okay. Then they go to Egypt. Bet Yehuda. It's got to be around here. Ayaki yikra lechem Pharaoh v'amar ma ma'asechem. Here. V'amartem anshe miknei hayu avadecha mi ni'urenu. ועד עתה גם אנחנו, גם אבותינו בעבור תשבו בארץ גושן כי תועבת מצרים כל רועי צאן. So here it is. This is Genesis chapter 46, verse 34. So Joseph is giving instructions to his father on what to say to Pharaoh so that Pharaoh will settle them in Goshen, basically far away. Right, on the outskirts. So he says here in verse 34, okay, so and when Pharaoh calls for you, and asks you, what do you do for a living? Then you should say that we've been men of livestock, men of livestock, from our youth until now. Both us and our ancestors and our fathers. In order that you should be able to dwell in the land of Goshen, Avat Mitzrayim kol ro'eh tzon, because it was an abomination to Egypt. Anyone who is a shepherd over sheep, anyone who flocks sheep, who shepherds sheep. Okay, so there's something about, I don't know if tzon is not just sheep. Tzon is flocks, which includes basically sheep and the goats. But anyone who's a shepherd, that's an abomination to Egypt. Now, I'm not sure why. Well, do you know why? Did the Egyptians have something against sheep? Was it their god? Like the Hindus with the cows? No, right? Let's look it up. Let's dig a little deeper and try to find out why did the chicken cross the road? No. League of Nations fall, Vietnam War start, U.S. and it's funny with the autocompletes. Why did the Egyptians despise shepherds? The shepherds, on the other hand, raised large. Because the shepherds raised cattle for meat, they were abhorred by the Egyptians. Oh, okay, interesting. Abomination to Egyptians in Genesis 43, 32, 46, 34. Our own Pinker. I don't know who this is. Okay. Oh, we're not going to read through the whole thing, my God. But let's read a little bit. What journal this is in, but all right. Available explanations of the causes for Egyptian sense of abomination, Genesis 43, 32, 46, 34, and Exodus 8:22. Let's check that out for a second. I don't remember what it says in Exodus 8:22 offhand. (8:22). והפליתי ביום ההוא את ארץ גושן אשר עמי עומד עליה לבלתי להיות שם ערוב למען תדע כי אני יהוה בקרב הארץ. I don't see any reference to. Okay. Anywho, so alrighty. It is suggested are either too general or incorrect. It is suggested that in Genesis 43:32, the sense of abomination possibly stems from the malodorous woolen garments worn by the Hebrews. Okay. In Genesis 46:34, it is perhaps a combination of basic farmer-shepherd distaste and hatred stemming from an association of shepherds with the barbaric nomadic chieftains on Egypt's northeastern border. Well, that's all speculation. And in Exodus 8:22, it might be driven by the Hebrews' customs of burning portions of animal sacrifice to a deity. These suggestions, while speculative, have a zitz im Leben context. You know what the heck that means? Zitz in Leben. What is the problem with Exodus 8:22? Sometimes this count here is off by. So one second. Something pedot ben ami uvein amechal. I don't see what the problem here is in Exodus 8:22, but all right, let's not worry about that right now. Genesis, I'm not going to read this whole article. We'll just read a little bit. We'll read the introduction. Genesis 43:32 tells that Joseph hosted his brothers as well as some Egyptian officials for dinner. The seating arrangements were, however, unusual. They served him by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves. The biblical narrator finds it necessary to supply an explanation for this curious situation, saying the Egyptians could not dine with the Hebrews since that would be an abomination to the Egyptians. This is not only the case in which something is identified. This is not the only case in which something is identified by the Bible as being an abomination, repugnant, or abhorrent to the Egyptians. In Genesis 46:34, Joseph instructs his brothers to tell Pharaoh they are shepherds so that they would be kept apart from the Egyptians. Where'd we go? Again, the biblical narrator explains, for all shepherds are abominable to Egyptians. Similarly, in Exodus 8:22, Moses explains to Pharaoh that sacrificing to God inside Egypt is not possible. Doing so would bring a strong and dangerous outburst from the Egyptian populace. All right. Okay, so that's 8:22. Where is that? 8. Okay. Here, right. V'ikra Paro el Moshe ula Aaron, and Pharaoh called to Moses and to Aaron, V'yomer lechu zivchu le'elohechem ba'aretz. Go sacrifice to your God in the land of Egypt. Verse 26, V'yomer Moshe lo nachon la'asot chen. And Moshe said, it would not be proper for us to do such a thing. Ki to'avat Mitzrayim nizbach liYehovah. Because the abomination of Egypt, we will sacrifice to God, to the Yehovah Eloheinu, our God. Hein nisbach et toravot Mitzrayim le'enehem velo yiskalunu. If we sacrifice the abomination of Egypt right in front of our eyes, will they not stone us to death? Huh. So what's usually sacrificed on the altar, right? It's usually either sheep or goats, but goats are really usually for sin offering. So sheep or bulls or cattle. So either way, some kind of livestock. So I'm not sure what they're referring to here, which if it's a specific animal, it says To'avat Mitzrayim, because we will sacrifice the abomination of Egypt to Yehovah Eloheinu. I guess maybe it would be equivalent of sacrificing for us. It would be the equivalent of someone sacrificing a pig next to us, right? We would find that abhorrent, right? The pig is the abomination of Israel. We could say To'avat Yisrael. So maybe it's the sheep, but it hasn't been narrowed down here. All right, let's read on a little bit. Any ideas from the audience? Okay, well, let's read this person's article. I have no idea who he is, but I picked it up off of the internet. In Genesis 46:34, Joseph instructs his brothers, tell Pharaoh that they are shepherds, so they will be kept apart from the Egyptians. Again, the biblical narrator explains, for all shepherds are abominable to the Egyptians. Oh, we read that already. It should be noted at the outset that there's no ambiguity. Let me make this large on the screen. It should be noted at the outset that there's no ambiguity regarding the meaning of toiva, right? That I'm going to skip, so we already know. Right. Yeah. Well, I'll read it. The verb toiva occurs 116 times in the Bible, and various forms of the verb occur 23 times. From the biblical parallels of the verb ta'av emerges the sense hate, subvert, despise, okay? Apparently, the verb was used to express inconvenience with anything. Oh boy, my battery's about to go out, so I'll take a break in a second. Since blah, 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 we can skip this part. Expressions of repugnance that were characteristic of the Egyptians naturally raised the question, what was the specific nature of the offense in each case? The purpose of this paper is to suggest an answer to this question. In the following, we discuss the 3 cases. Siriatim, I think that's a fancy Latin word for saying in series, Siriatim. I wonder what journal this is with. I have no idea. Okay. Let's read a little bit more. It is interesting to note that Josephus, in his retelling of Joseph's story, skips the details of the Egyptians being unable to eat with the Hebrews. Philo, however, finds in the separation of the guests at the dinner a reflection of Joseph's gracefulness as a host. He says on Joseph 2:02, and the manner of their entertainment was to each party in accordance with their national customs, since Joseph thought it was wrong to overturn ancient laws, and especially to, okay. This would imply that Egyptians considered the Hebrew culinary customs abominable and raises some questions. How did Joseph's cooks know to prepare food according to Hebrew culinary customs? Could not Joseph's cooks come up with a menu that would be set? Now this guy's losing me. Okay, we're going to skip ahead a little bit. Targum Jonathan, well, who cares what Targum Jonathan says, and who cares what Josephus says? These are all, over 1,000 years after the events occurred. Then we have Kimchi, Ibn Ezra, and Barbanel claim that the Egyptians were vegetarians. I don't know where they get that from. Consequently, could not partake in the meat dinner that was prepared for the Hebrews. The Hebrews were eating meat as he said, slaughter and prepare an animal, and the Egyptians did not eat. And the cattle that they raised were for milk and shearing. It was said that they worshipped the constellation Ram. That is why they did not eat the meat of a beast. Okay, maybe. Ibn Ezra, I don't think there was a lot of knowledge about ancient Egypt at the time that the Ibn Ezra lived, but okay. Ibn Ezra even makes the Egyptian vegans as he believes the Hindu in India were being vegan. Okay, we can skip this. Here, Egyptologists have long ago established that Egyptians ate cattle, birds, and fish as part of their daily fare. There's evidence suggesting that the ancient Egyptians were keeping and breeding animals already 6,000 years ago. Cattle, sheep, and goats were used for meat and milk. Pigs and fowl were used for meat. It's true that the cow was sacred to many goddesses. Hathor, blah, blah, blah. Bulls were sacred to Ra. The ram and the goose were considered sacred animals. Okay. It should, however, be noted that any taboos associated with a specific god applied only to the priesthood and followers of that god. Such taboos had primarily a local character with no power outside the city or province. Okay. All right. Okay. I think maybe we should drop it here because this is just going into a long, kind of convoluted discussion. If you want to read it on your own, here's the link. I'll post it. Again, I don't know who this person is. I just kind of Googled it. Seems like he kind of knows what he's talking about, but I don't know. Okay, so I'll just post the link here. And I'm going to take another 5-minute break because I have to set up, I have to get the battery. The battery's about to go dead. So let me put on a bit more music. Let's see, what can we put on this time? What can we put on? How about this? I'll be back in about 5 minutes. A second. No. No. What did he say? Oh, okay. Okay, one second. Okay, if you're cold, then turn that up. Have that on 1,000. Yeah, but it's in the room, right? So let me just the battery. I love something good.
They were so distracted that the cameraman was right near the tire of the car, and the man stopped. Suddenly, he was scared. Didn't know how to make him stop. Just do it. I was scared. I ran over to the homeless street and then I saw that.
One second, sir. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. He was a Greek historian.
Most of these pictures you see of busts that you think of as Greek busts, you always see an action underneath saying it's a Roman copy of Greek origin.
Oh, really?
And most of the stuff we have here is Roman copies
Oh, sure. It just didn't wait. I'm going to do tonight, okay?
with the crackers and that's it.
Okay. I need too much stuff, please. Right? And the crackers. How much do you have to study? Come, baby. Okay. Let's get back here. Okay, so we are back online. Let's just do a, let's do a, oh my. No, there we go. Let's do a quick sound check. Is the sound okay? Can everybody hear me? Yes, no, maybe so. If you can, just type in something so I know that you can hear me. Okay, so, okay, cool. Alrighty, so let's go back to our study. So you were mentioning that Robert Alter mentioned something. So let's take a look at what Robert Alter has to say about that. So that's in Genesis. So we can go back to our, yeah, just to get one last opinion. Do a little bit of a deep dig sometimes. So here we're on Genesis 45. No. 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 Okay, that brings us back. So it's Genesis 43, 32. So let's see what Robert Alter, who I quote a lot, has to say. And so we have to go up to 43. Ooh. What happened here? Why I want to go any more than this? This happens sometimes. Let me refresh. And then after this, we'll close out this topic. And oh, I think I got logged out. That's why. All right, let me look on my phone. 1 second. Oh, you did? Okay, perfect. So Robert Alter says, for the Egyptians would not eat bread with the Hebrews. The dietary exclusionism of the Egyptians is also attested by Herodotus, who is a Greek historian, probably the most predominant Greek historian. Both medieval and modern commentators have linked this taboo with an Egyptian prohibition against eating lamb, a staple of Hebrew diet. Okay. And it was abhorrent to Egypt. The consensus of English translations treats this as to the Egyptians, but the Masoretic vocalization of the final noun, Mitzrayim, and not Mitzrim, construes it as to Egypt, which makes perfect. Okay, that's another point altogether. Okay, so yeah, so let's go on. So we were here, and we might as well just continue here. Okay. So again, any questions, any comments that anybody wants to make? Oh, Yardain is back. Hi, Yardain. So, Yardain, if you want to say something, just type it in, or if you want to say something with your voice, you can do that as well. Just let me know. So now we are in verse 33. Vayishvu lefanav habachor ki bechorato atzair k'tzirato. So they sat in order, basically from the oldest to the youngest, all 11 brothers. Uyit mahu ha'anashim ish el re'ehu. And each brother kind of looked at each other in astonishment. How do they translate this here exactly? Yeah, looked in astonishment, right? Itmahu. So they didn't know what the heck is going on. Why is this Egyptian calling us back to eat with him? Maybe they also didn't understand why Joseph wasn't eating with the rest of the Egyptians. Maybe that's why they were looking in astonishment. But let's see. You know, all of that's going on. I guess they were just they had no idea what was going on. They were just astonished. Okay, verse 34. Why Yisa masot me'et panav alehem. Waterev masat binyamin mi masot kulam chamesh yadot vayishtu vayishkaru imo. So we saw masot me'et panav alehem. I want to get an English translation for that. That's not so clear exactly what that means. I'll just take the NIV for the heck of it. It's 34. When the portions were served to them from Joseph's table, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone's else. It says, now let's go back to the Hebrew. Masot me'et panav. It doesn't mention Joseph at all in this verse, so that's kind of a masot me'et panav. Okay. Masot. So when the portions were given from before his face, from before him, I guess that's referring to Joseph, alehem, to them, today masot binyamin, masot kulam chamesh yadot, that the portion of Binyamin was greater than the portions of all the rest by 5 times. And I want to look at this word masot. I mean, I know where it comes from. But why does it mean uplifting utterance, burden, portion carried to someone, especially from the table of a king or superior? Interesting. So the underlying word is, the underlying root is nasa, which means to lift up. It's used many, many times throughout the Tanakh. But here, this is Wayisa masot me'et panav. So literally, and he lifted up, or was lifted up, the liftings up, masot me'et panav, from before his face, alehem, to them. So this is usually translated as portions, but literally it means a masa. A masa is like a burden, or something that's a heavy burden. So here masot means like heavy burdens, or things that are lifted up. And so here it's explaining that it's a portion carried to someone, especially from the table of a king or superior. That's this verse. Let's take a look at 2 Samuel 11:8 to get a little bit more clarification on that word. So 2 Samuel 11:8. Umer David le Uriah. So this is the famous story with David and Uriah the Hittite. Red le beitcha. Go back down to your house. Urhatz raglecha, and wash your feet. Vitzei Uriah me beit hamelech. V'titzei acharav mas'at hamelech. And Uriah went from the house of the king, and after him came the portion of the king. I'm not sure I'm understanding what that's trying to say. Let's see here. Or present, it translates as here, a mess of meat from the king. So the KJV, the King James, translates it as a mess of meat. Second Samuel 11:8, present. Okay, so a portion, a masat, something again, something that's lifted up. Masat Bashan. Okay, I think we get the idea. So let's unravel and go back to where we were. So we're in Genesis 43. So we saw masat me'et panav. So the portion or the lifting up, the portion that was lifted up before his face, meaning before Yosef's face, elehem, to them. Okay. Oterev masat binyamin, and the portion of Benjamin, the thing that was lifted up to Benjamin, was greater by 5 times from the other portions. And they drank and they became drunk. So yishkaru usually means become drunk, but that seems to be an odd thing for them to do. But I guess, yeah, become drunk. Shecha. Let's see, does it have any other meaning? To make drunk. Yeah, drunk, to be merry. Okay, it basically means drunk. So they got drunk with him. Okay, so the brothers, the first time, well, it's not the first time, but the first time they're sitting down to eat in a long time, what do? They drink and get drunk. All right. And by the way, this is what I like to do when I study the Tanakh. As I mentioned last week, there's so many words like lishtaker, shikur is in modern Hebrew, but maybe the modern Hebrew meaning doesn't mean the same as the biblical Hebrew meaning. So often I'll take words which I believe I know the meaning of, but I like to verify or check, because the meanings that I know could have been influenced by either rabbinical understandings or later rabbinical understandings or modern Hebrew or whatever the case may be. So lishtaker, or in this case lishkor, is a very common word, which means to get drunk, but it just seemed a little bit out of place. Like it doesn't make sense that they would sit and get drunk. So I said to myself, maybe it meant something else. Maybe lishtaker, even though you have the word shechar, which is used a number of times in the Torah and clearly means basically liquor. But I said to myself, maybe it means something else. Let's look it up. And that's often the way when I'm studying Torah, that's what I do. Something seems a little suspicious, I try to look into the meaning behind the word, because I know that even if I think I know the meaning of the word, I may not know the meaning of the word, because that meaning in modern Hebrew could have changed. Okay, so that's the end of Genesis chapter 43. Let's go into Genesis chapter 44. And any comments or questions at this point? If you have any comments or questions, or if you want to participate, just type it in. So we can close this off. Let me see if I can close some of these windows out. We can close this off. Well, maybe I want to save it for later to read for myself. We can close this off. This is other stuff that I was reading before. What is this? This Maccabees. I'll leave this open for now. So I want to go back to it afterwards. Okay. So Benjamin in the silver cup. Oitzav et asher al bito. So he commanded the person over his house. Lemor malay et amtachot anashim. And amtachot should mean like backpack, sacks. Anashim ochel. So he's commanding the person who's over his house to fill up the sacks, the backpacks, or not backpacks, but the sacks of these men, of the 11 brothers, with food, kashir yuchlun seit, as much as they can carry. Wasim kasef ish befi amtachto, and put money in the opening of each backpack, or of each sack. Vet gavii gavia hakesef tasim befi amtachat hakaton, and my chalice, I guess you would translate that as my cup. They usually translate gavia as chalice, cup. Givia hakesef tasim befi amtachat hakaton, and place my chalice, my special cup, my silver cup, place in the mouth in the opening of the sack of the youngest one, the kesef shivro, and the money that he used to purchase the food. Yas kedavar Yosef asher diber. And just 1 second here. Lemor malei et amtachot anashim. Ocher kashir chulun tzeit v'sim kesef ish befi amtachto. Tasim befi amtachto katon ve'et kesef shivro. So put the cup and the money in the smallest ones. V'yas kedavar Yosef asher diber. And so the person did it. The head of the household did this. Now, this is not the first time. This is not the first time that money has been put in the sacks, right? This is why Benjamin is down here to begin with, because well, we'll see it afterwards if we go back to the beginning. Okay. Aboker or. So it was the morning light. V'anashim shulchu hema v'chamorehem. So it was the morning light, and the men basically went their way along with their donkeys. Im yatsu et ha'ir lo hirchiku, and they exited the city, and lo hirchiku, and didn't get very far. But Yosef amar la'asher al beito, and Yosef said to the person over his household, the same person, right, who put them put the stuff in the sacks in the first place. Kum rdof acharei anashim, arise and chase after these men. V'sigtam, and when you catch them, okay. Say to them, Lama shilamtem ra'a tachat tova. Why did you pay evil? Why did you pay back bad in place in place of good? Okay, I did you good, so you're to say to them basically what Yosef wants to say to them is, I did good for you, and now you're paying me back with evil. You're stealing my money and my and my special chalice. Verse 5, Halo ze asher yishte adoni bo. Is this not the thing, the one that my master drinks from? Behu nachesh yinachesh bo, vareotem asher asitem. And he also does divination in it. Hareotem asher asitem. What you've done is very evil. Okay, so this chalice is not only used for drinking, but it's also used for divination. So what does that mean? As far as I understand, they would pour wine or some kind of liquid in the cup, and then they would read the patterns of the wine in the cup. So let's just check this out. Let's see if we get any more information about that. Dividing by omens. Practice divination, secret things. No, it doesn't give us what it means to do divination in a cup. But from what I understand, that's what it's referring to. That some kind of liquid was poured into the cup, and then the patterns in the liquid were read to tell the future or to get secret information. Okay, verse 6. And he caught up to them, meaning the head of the household caught up to them, to the brothers, and he spoke these words. And so the brothers said to him, "Why, my master, would you say such things? Would you say these words? Halila la'avdecha me'asot kedavar hazeh. God forbid that your servants should do such a thing. In kesef asher matzanu b'fi amtachotenu heshivonu the money that we found in the opening of our bags, of our sacks, we returned elecha to you, me'eretz Canaan, all the way from the land of Canaan. Ve'ech nignov mibeit adonecha kesef ozahav. So how is it? Literally, how would we steal, or why would we steal gold and silver from the house of our master? In other words, why on planet Earth would we steal? We brought back the money that was put in our sacks by accident, and so it's not logical that we would steal more, right? It's using basically a logical argument. Okay, verse 9. Asher yimatzei ito me'avadecha v'umet. And then the brothers say, if whoever, I'm just going to paraphrase here, with whomsoever the it's found, he will die. He should be put to death. And also we'll be slaves. We'll be slaves to my master. I guess speaking to ultimately to Yosef. Okay, verse 10. Yomer gam ata ki divrechem ken hu asher yimatzeh ito yeh li eved atem tihu nekiim. And he said, Gam ata ki divrechem. Yeah, I want to get an English translation on this as well. Verse 10. Getting some kind of weird use of words. Very well, then he said, let it be as you say. Okay, that's what didn't make sense. Okay, now it makes sense. I said, okay, also now, according to your words, kenhu, so it shall be. Asher yimatzeh ito yeli eved. Whoever it shall be found with shall be my slave, and you and v'atem tihu nikiim, and the rest shall go free. So it's different from what the brothers said, right? The brothers said, with whomever is found, that the chalice should be put to death, and the rest will be the slaves. And then the head of the household says, no, not exactly. He says, yes, so your words are correct, but whomsoever is found the chalice, he shall be my slave, and the rest can go free. So, one second. Right. so it's interesting because I think about this, and actually this is a worse punishment in a certain sense, because, well, obviously it's not a worse punishment because Benjamin in the case. So what the brothers suggest is whoever it's found with should be put to death, and the rest should be slaves, right? And the head of the household comes back and says, no, whoever it's found with will be my slave, and the rest of you can go free. Well, that's almost, and I say it in quotes because obviously it's not a worse punishment than Benjamin being killed, but it's kind of a worse punishment in the sense that in the first case, the brothers wouldn't have to go back and face them. They would all be enslaved, and Benjamin would be dead. You know, they wouldn't have to go back and tell their father the one thing that they dread telling the father, and the one thing that a number of the sons promised to Jacob, that they would bring back Benjamin safe and sound, right? So when the head of the household, and I don't know if he's doing this on his own or he was told by Yosef, or somehow he's figuring out, understands the essence of the story, but when the head of the household says, no, whoever I find it with will stay, and the rest of you go back home, that's actually in a sense a worse punishment, because then the other 10 brothers have to go back and face their father and have to say that Benjamin is a slave, has become a slave in to the second in command of Pharaoh in Egypt, right? So that's almost a worse punishment, because they swore. In fact, I believe it was Reuven. We'll see, it's earlier in the parsha, but I believe it's Reuven who said, I think it was Reuven and then Yehuda. Reuven said, "You can kill my 2 sons, or you can kill my sons if I don't bring back Benjamin, safe and sound." And then Yehuda said something similar. But basically, so this is almost a worse punishment, right? The brothers are thinking, the brothers, by suggesting that Benjamin die and they become slaves, are actually trying to save their behinds, because then at least they don't have to face their father and say that they don't have Benjamin with them. But the father's worst fear is they would come back and Benjamin would be gone. And so when the head of the household says that, that'll be the punishment. That's actually not an easier punishment on them. That's actually a more severe punishment on them. That's actually a worse punishment on them. Right? Okay, let's see. Let me give me 1 second here. Let's see what Robert Alter says on this. I always like his opinion. So just give me 1 second here. So change this. Let me see if I can log in here. My Nook. Oh boy. Okay. That's good. Let's get 1 second here. And we're in Genesis 44. Okay. All right. So let's get a little Robert Alter in here. See, what I really like to do when I do these studies is have a discussion. But since no one is brave enough to come up on camera and have a discussion, there's no back and forth here. So I'll have a kind of static back and forth with Robert Alter. Maybe we can see what he says and comment on it a little bit. So, all right. Yeah, that we know. They and their donkeys. Again, the donkeys attacked on the sentence. Okay. Is this is not this the one from which? Oh shoot! I forgot. I can't. So let's lose the page. 1 second. Sorry about that. 2, 3, 44. The donkeys. Is not this the one from which my Lord drinks, and in which he always divines? The fact that the goblet is referred to only by a demonstrative pronoun, the one from which a reflective flaunting of the assumption that as all concerned should recognize the only thing at issue here is the goblet. The brothers may well have seen Joseph drinking from the goblet at the dinner the day before, whereas its use for divination would have been news to them. The probable mechanism of divination in a goblet, here we go, would be to interpret patterns on the surface of the liquid it contained or in drops running down its sides. So that's referring to what we're talking about, right? The probable mechanism, I wonder if I can even grab this. I can't copy and paste on this. Okay. At any rate, the probable mechanism of divination in a goblet would be to interpret patterns on the surface of the liquid it contained or in drops running down its sides. Divination would have been a plausible activity on the part of a member of the high Egyptian bureaucracy with its technology of soothsaying, but the emphasis it is given here is also linked with Joseph's demonstrated ability to predict the future and his superiority of knowledge in relation to his brothers. Okay. It's an interesting point. He of your servants with whom it will be found shall die. So this is Genesis 44:9. Right? So that's what the brothers say. This is now the verse we were just talking about. To the standards of Eastern law, though Gerhard von Rad has proposed that stealing a sacred object would have been deemed a capital crime. Brothers' words are quite similar to those spoken by their father to Laban 31:32, before he rummaged through the belongings of Jacob's wife in search of the missing household gods. Right. Remember, Jacob is running away from Laban, and Laban notices as teraphim, which are usually translated as household gods, like little idols that you carry around with you, were missing. And then when he catches up to Yaakov, he says, "Why did you steal my household gods?" And Yaakov says, "I did not do such a thing. And anyone, if you find those household gods with anyone, that person shall be put to death." And actually, Rachel had them, and then she sat on them and said she was in her time of her period, so she couldn't get up. Okay. I'm sure you remember the story. At any rate, it is a teasing parallel with crucial differences. Laban does not find what he's looking for, but the death sentence pronounced on the actually guilty party, Benjamin's mother, Rachel, appears to be carried out later when she dies bearing him. I'm not so sure about that. And we shall become slaves to our Lord. The gratuitous additional condition, a reflex of their perfect confidence in their innocence of the theft, carries forward the great theme of moral restitution. The brothers who sold Joseph into slavery now offer themselves as slaves. Okay, so he's kind of saying it's like karma. What goes around comes around. The term Eved means both servant and slave, and the speeches in this episode poignantly play the two meanings against each other. Where the brothers refer to themselves as your servants, they are clearly using courtly language of self-abasement. When they or Judah offer to be slaves, they're proposing to surrender their freedom and enter into condition of actual servitude. Alrighty, fair enough. Even so, as by your words, let it be. So now we're talking about this verse here. Gamata, even so, kidivrechem kenhu. Okay, even so, by your words, kidivrechem kenhu, let it be. Okay, so that's how Robert Alter translates those 5 words, which are these first words of response by the major domo. I don't even know what that. Major domo. I think that means head of the household. Domo is like domicile or domestic, means household, and major means that the major. Head of the household may constitute a kind of bureaucratic or legal flourish. He begins by this is exact. He begins by seeming to concur in the stern sentence the brothers have pronounced on themselves should the goblet be found among them. But having accepted the principle, they enunciated that the guilty party should be punished and a distinction be made between him and his brothers. The major domo modifies the sentence to make it more reasonable. The guilty brother will be made a slave and the others allowed to go free. That's exactly what I was talking about before. This is why I wanted to get an English translation of the sentence, because something seemed a little bit off. And let me maybe explain that a little bit. So it says, V'yomer gam ata kidvrechem kein hu. Okay? And he said, gam ata, literally, and now, kidvrechem, according to your words, kein hu, so it is. Okay? So he seems to be agreeing with them, but then he doesn't agree with them. Right? That's exactly why I wanted to consult an English translation, because the words didn't correlate with the narrative of the story. And then he offers the alternative: Asher yematza ito, whoever with whomsoever it is found, yali eved v'atem tiyu nikiim. He shall be my slave, and the rest can go free. Okay, so Robert Alter basically says that it's a bureaucratic or legal flourish. Okay, and he does agree in the sense that there's a punishment. There should be a punishment, a distinction made between him and his brothers, meaning the one with whom the cup is found should have a harsher punishment than the rest of the brothers, but then he modifies the sentence itself. Okay, I like that explanation. I think it's a good explanation. Verse 14, and that already goes on to the next parsha, I believe. No, not yet. Yavo Yehuda v'cha beita Yosef u'otenu sham yomer lehem Yosef ma ma'aseh hazeh asher asitem halo. Okay, right. So right. Okay. So then we can go on a little bit. So almost at the end of the parsha. V'yavo Yehuda. Okay. All right. So we got some clarification. No exception. Yomer gam ata. Okay, we read that already. V'yimharu v'yoridu ish et amtachto. So each person hurriedly placed his sack down on the floor, on the ground. V'yiftachu ish amtachto. And each person opened up a sack. V'yachapes begadol echel bekaton. Kila, and they searched. V'yachapes, and he searched. From starting with the biggest and going down to the smallest, meaning starting with the eldest, Reuven, and going down to the smallest one, Benjamin. In other words, okay, so the cup was in Benjamin's sack. Benjamin is going to be last in the search, but this also references back to what we saw in the previous chapter, right? Where we saw they were sitting, when they were sitting with Yosef, it says they sat in order of the oldest to the youngest. Let's find this. Here, verse 33, Genesis chapter 43, verse 33. וישבו לפניו הבכור כי בכורתו יצעיר כצעירתו. יתמהו האנשים איש רעהו. So they sat before him, the brothers sat before him. הבכור כי בכורתו, the oldest according, literally it literally says the firstborn according to his firstborn status, and the youngest according to his youngest, his status as being the youngest. But what it really implies is that they're sitting in order from the oldest to the youngest, right? And so we have the same thing here. They're checking the sacks, the backpacks of the I won't say backpacks, is probably weren't on the backs, on the sacks of the sons of Jacob in the order from the oldest to the youngest. So is this an Egyptian thing? Do they do things? Are they very, mindful of of order, of the order in which children are born? Is it a Hebrew thing, right? Are they? Is it that the children of Jacob know that they're supposed to arrange themselves, from oldest to youngest, or is it just a general, Middle East kind of thing? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. Let's see if Robert Alter has anything to say about that. Nope, nothing. Let's see if he says it previously in the previous chapter. Yeah. So Robert Alter says, and they were seated before him. The seating in order of age, of course, has been done at Yosef's direction. Okay, so he attributes it to Yosef. It constitutes a kind of dramatization of the contrast between knowledge and ignorance. And he recognized them, but they did not recognize him. It has been paramount from the moment the brothers first set foot in Egypt. So in other words, I guess what Robert Alter is saying is that Yosef sits them in order of oldest to youngest, implying that he knows who the oldest is and who the youngest is. But I don't really go for that comment. I think he could have just said something like, arrange yourselves from oldest to youngest, or it could have been that the brothers, know that they're supposed to sit at the table from oldest to youngest. That I don't go for that particular explanation personally. But I don't know. It's just interesting that it's mentioned twice, this oldest to youngest order, right? Both in the sitting down at the table with Yosef, and here when they're checking out the sacks of the brothers. Okay. Yosef Mamas. Wait, where were we? Yosef. We're up here. Right. Verse 13. And so so in here it clearly is. I think here I have to say that now that I'm thinking about it, I should write this down. I'm writing a commentary on the Torah, and I want to add this to a note somewhere. I'll just add it over here. So I think here it just basically they mention oldest to youngest because it increased. I mean, whether it happened or not, let's assume it happened, right? But it increases the tension in the narrative of the story, right? Because if Benjamin's was the first one they opened, and there's the chalice, then okay, that's. But it's much more. The narrative is much more exciting if you picture them checking everyone's and they don't find it, 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 and then you get to Binyamin, and it's like the tension. You can almost hear the music and the tense music in the background as if you're watching a movie. So I would venture to guess that that's the purpose of mentioning here that they checked from the oldest to the youngest. That Benjamin would be last in the order, and so the tension would rise after each sack is checked. Finally, they get to Benjamin, right? You can picture it. All 10 brothers have been their sacks have been checked, and now Benjamin is the last one. Okay, we as the audience, know what's going to happen. We know it's in Benjamin's sack because we have what is that called? The audience privilege, or I forgot what it's called. There's some fancy name for it, but we, reading the story, we know what's going to happen. But and the brothers there, they haven't. Let's picture where among the brothers there, or one of the brothers, we have no idea that it's going to be found in Benjamin's sack, because remember the brothers promised Yosef, or promised the head of Yosef's household that doesn't make any sense that we would steal this stuff, steal anything. We return the other stuff, and anyone who it's found with will die. That's how sure they were that it wasn't with Benjamin. So you can imagine the absolute shock when Benjamin's sack is opened, the last one, and there it is, and you could see the tension rising. Or maybe on the one hand, the audience, us knowing all, the tension rising as if this were a movie each time another sack is opened. Okay. On the other hand, the brothers not knowing, believing that it's not going to be found in Benjamin's sack. They're completely confident that it's not going to be found in Benjamin's sack. And on the other hand, the head of the household knows exactly what's going on, right? So I think it just has to do with setting up the narrative in a way that kind of maximizes the tension. And there's one thing that can be said about this whole story, which I believe is true, of course, as a religious, as a believer in Yehovah and in the Torah. I'm not trying to say that this didn't happen, although sometimes stories can be modified a bit for dramatic effect in the Torah, I believe. But at any rate, let's assume that this did happen, then we could say the whole setup is by God. At any rate, the narrative that it creates in the story is that the tension, it's the maximum amount of tension. That last sack is opened. The brothers have no idea the chalice is going to be found there. The head of the household, of Joseph's household, knows exactly what's going to happen. Okay, we reading the story know exactly what's going to happen, right? And so it just adds to the narrative, is I guess my point. Okay, so yeah, I want to write that down for myself. Well, can you just send me a message? Just send me a message that says Benjamin last adds to narrative. That's all. Just those 4 words, all right? So pick it up later. Okay, so Yoridu ish. Okay, so there we are. Amtachat Binyamin, v'yikra'ush simlotam ya'amos ish. Oh boy. What I want to say is the Yosef story is just filled with this, this incredible tension and these very emotional moments, Well, again, picture you're watching a movie. Now we have verse 13. We kra'us simlotam. So all the brothers, they rip their shirts, right? Or not their shirts, their robes or their outfits, their clothing. Yamos ish el chamorov yeshuva ero, and they put all their sacks back onto their donkeys, and they return to the city, meaning they return back to to the city where Yosef was. So right, so you could just picture, right, the brothers now. Oh boy, the sense of doom they must have. Okay, Benjamin is now going to be a slave forever. They're thinking to themselves, we have to go back. We have to face our father Yaakov and tell him that we swore up and down. We swore on the lives of our own children, right? That we were going to bring back Benjamin safe and sound, and now he's a slave to some weird, dude who's second in command to Pharaoh, and you're never going to see Benjamin again. So that must have been the longest walk, right, in the history of the world, right? Could you imagine them they're on their way home, they've got their food, they're out of there, they've got Benjamin, everything's going well, right? And all of a sudden this happens, and now they have to turn around, they have to load all their crap back on their donkeys and take this horrible, walk of shame, more than shame, this walk of terror and horror back to Egypt, and because the chalice has been found in Benjamin's sack. I mean, just picture the tension there of them, turning around and walking back towards Egypt, or wherever. What city was it in? I don't know what city Yosef would have been sitting in. What was the capital of Egypt at that time? I don't know. At any rate, so whatever city he was sitting, Memphis maybe, or was Memphis later? At any rate, so whatever city Yosef was sitting in, had to go back there, and then had to basically face the what's the word? What's the expression? I don't know. I can't think of the expression offhand, but had to face their worst nightmares. That's the expression I was thinking of. Okay, so yeah. Okay, verse 14. V'yavo Yehuda ve'achav beita Yosef, and Yehuda and his brothers came into the house of Yosef. Now this is interesting. Also, why does it mention Yehuda and his brothers? Why is Yehuda singled out here, right? Well, I guess the reason is that in verse 18, Yehuda is going to be the one that, here it says, Judah pleads for Benjamin. In the next parsha, next week, we're going to see Yehuda basically gives us this long emotional speech, which finally breaks Yosef. That's it. He can't take it anymore, and he starts he reveals himself. He starts crying and reveals himself, right? So that's obviously, I would imagine, why Yehuda was singled out here. Okay, and Robert Alter says, and Judah with his brothers came. The Hebrew says Judah and his brothers, but uses a characteristic grammatical device, a verb conjugated in the singular instead of the plural, to indicate that the first stated noun, Judah, is the principal agent, the thematically focused subject of the verb. In a moment, Judah will step forward and become the spokesman for all the brothers, the ringing voice of their collective conscience. Right. So pretty much what I was saying, more or less, although Robert Alter adds the fact that V'yavo Yehuda ve'echav Beta, really it should say, if we're being grammatically accurate, which the Torah really doesn't stick to the rules all the time for various reasons, usually narrative reasons. And that's exactly what Robert Alter is saying here. It should say V'yavo Yehuda ve'echav. It should be the plural. Okay, they came, Yehuda and his brothers came to the house of Joseph. But here it says Yehuda and his brothers came, using only the singular. Yehuda came and his brothers, maybe would be a good way to translate it, to the house of Yosef. And so Robert Alter points out correctly here that the reason Yehuda is singled out is the same reason I mentioned, that now the narrative or the focus is going to switch to Yehuda as he gives us this emotional speech in next week's parsha. But okay. But I think what's interesting here is we see something that Robert Alter mentions, and I was just mentioning, that the Torah will not always be grammatically correct or grammatically accurate. Okay, sometimes you can have a female, there's in Hebrew, there's number, and there's also gender, right? So there's masculine and feminine, just like there is in the Romance languages, and there's also number, like there is in, I guess, every language, right, including English. So sometimes number will not match up. The noun and the verb, the subject and the verb will not match up in terms of number, and sometimes not in terms of gender. And often it's trying to say something by that. So Robert Alter is pointing out here that the fact that it doesn't match up, it should say v'yavo'u, should be the plural, when in fact it's a singular at the beginning of verse 14, is putting the emphasis on just Yehuda here. Okay. So the brothers, now they don't even bow, they don't even bow down and prostrate themselves. They just fall right on the ground before him. They're just like, you can imagine what's going through their mind, right? Because they don't know how the story's going to end up. They think that's the end. Benjamin's going to be a slave, and we're going to have to go back and tell him we lost Benjamin. And then Reuven is going to have to put his children to death because that's what he promised his father. And Yehuda, I can't remember what did Yehuda promise. He also promised that he would put himself to death, or I can't remember, his children to death. Anyway, it's going to be a bloodbath. Okay, so v'yiplu lefanav arza, verse 15. V'yomer, well, can you please close that door? Okay. Yomer lahem Yosef ma ha'maaseh azeh asher asitam halo yadatam ki nachesh yenachesh ish asher kamoni. And so Yosef says, what is this? What is this thing that you have done? Didn't you know, or shouldn't you know? See, it's another thing. Halo yadatem. It says yadatem. That's usually understood as the past. Okay, but past and future are not always so clear in Hebrew. That's why a lot of people will say that the real forms of the past and future are the perfect and the imperfect, because the future form can imply a lot of different moods, one can say, or a lot of different implications, and so can the past here. So if I were to read it completely literally, okay, maybe like a modern Israeli would do it, because unfortunately the language is degenerated. The modern Hebrew is much more like a European language, or like a Romance language from influence over the many generations. But in biblical Hebrew, Yomer lahem Yosef Mama says asitem halo yadatem. Literally, didn't you know? Ki nachash yenachesh ish asher kamoni, that a man such as myself, a man is such a person as me, such a great person as me, will surely uses divination, or surely engages in divination. But it doesn't really mean didn't you know. It really means shouldn't you know. Halo yadatem, right? Because if you should know something, then you already knew it in the past, I guess is the implication here. Okay. my point is that even though this appears grammatically, this is the past tense, that the past tense can be expressing, tenses in Hebrew can express many different subtle messages or many different subtle moods. And here it's not saying, didn't you know that I certainly divine? Halo yadatem ki nachesh yenachesh ish asher kamoni. Halo yadatem, wouldn't you, shouldn't you know, or wouldn't you have already known, something along those lines? Okay, I'll translate it. Shouldn't you know? Okay, halo yadatem, shouldn't you know? Ki nachesh yenachesh. It's certainly that a ish asher kamoni, that a man such as myself, a man so great as myself, number 2 in all of Egypt, and I rose to my power by interpreting dreams. Obviously, you should know that. Obviously, I engage in, that I know how to engage in divination. Okay. Again, we have nachesh yenachesh. This is repetition. I've said this many times throughout many studies, that when you have a doubling or a repetition, that implies emphasis, right? So it's often translated into English as certainly or verily, right? That's a word that you see a lot, right? Shouldn't you know that verily that a man like myself verily engages in divination, or surely engages in divination, right? It's the repetition. Again, we have the same. We don't use it as often in English. In the Torah, you'll see it all the time, where doubling is meant to imply emphasis. But in English, you have a similar thing. You could say it's very, very, very hot out today, right? That the repetition is really emphasis. Okay. Oh wait. Okay. So verse 16. Yomer Yehuda ma nomar la'adoni. And Yehuda said, what can we possibly say? Literally, what will we say? But again, the mood here is, what shall we say, or what could we possibly say? Ma nomar la'adoni. Ma nidaber. What could we possibly? What words can we? What could we possibly speak? What words could we possibly speak? Ma nitztadak, and how could we possibly justify? How can we possibly justify ourselves? Nitztadak. Okay. How can we be justified, or how can we justify ourselves? This is the hitpael form, what's usually understood as the reflexive, right? Umanitz tadak. So verse 16 should be translated something along the lines of, Yehuda said, what could we possibly say to my master? And what words could we possibly speak? And how can we possibly justify ourselves? Okay? So it's almost like Yehuda is giving up at this point. Ha'elohim matzah et avon avadecha, hinenu avadim la'adoni. So here's something interesting, right? And so then Yehuda basically pours out his heart a little bit and says, God has literally found, but has revisited, repaid, has remembered or refound, let's say, has found or remembered or revisited the inequities, the wrongdoings of his servants. Okay, so basically, you're just saying, what he said earlier in the parsha, but we didn't go through that part in detail, where he's basically saying, well, it was Reuven who said, not that, not to touch Joseph. Not to do anything to Yosef. But here, so Yehuda is saying, basically what we did to Yosef, to our brother Yosef, it's still on their minds after all these years. Remember, we figured out that Yosef is approximately 40 now. He was 17 when he was thrown into the pit, so it's now 23 years later, approximately. And so this is still very much on their mind, obviously, right? And so God is paying us back is basically what, we give up. God's paying us back. There's nothing more I can say. There's nothing I can say at this point. Okay. It's almost like a recognition of surrender. Right. And sometimes when you surrender, right. Sometimes when you surrender yourself in life, that's when beautiful things start to happen. Okay. I mean, I don't want to get too, too touchy-feely here, but that's kind of a, they talk about surrender, right? like some of the spiritual masters, so to speak, will speak about surrendering yourself to whatever happens, right? And then whatever happens, and sometimes it's a beautiful thing that you didn't expect. Well, that's about what's about to happen here. There's still a bit more twists and turns to the story, but basically at this point, Yehuda just surrenders. He says, "That's it. I mean, there's nothing more we can say. This is from God, and God has obviously come to punish us. Okay, I give up." But then Yehuda tries again, very sneaky. Very sneaky. I remember we were up in Israel one time, and we visited. If you're ever in Israel and you go to Akko, which got burnt down during the Arab riots against the Jews last year. But at any rate, if you go to Akko, there's a replication of, what was it? It's a Turkish bathhouse from Ottoman times, right, folk? Remember? It's like a replication of a Turkish Ottoman bathhouse which existed in Akko, acres, the way they say it in English, ACRE, at the time. Very, very interesting. Really very interesting. Dane says, "I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. I caught a small bit of last week's stream when you delved into Yaakov's passing, but now it seems he's still alive." No, there's no jumping in the story. Yaakov's passing was not last week. It was Yitzhak's passing that was last week, Yarden, not Yaakov's. Okay, so anyway, if you ever get the chance to visit, it's a very interesting exhibit. They really did a very nice job. It tries to recreate, I guess, like Turkish steam bath or bathhouse culture in Israel in the whatever it was, 15 or 1600s, or maybe it was the 1700s. But there's one point where they have these mannequins speaking to each other, and these, like, they're supposed to be Turks, I guess. And the Ottomans, well, let's see, the Ottomans took over Israel in the 1500s and kept it until the 1900s. So I guess sometime between 1500 and 1900 approximately. I think it was 1539 or something when the Turks took over. At any rate, so at one point, these mannequins are speaking to each other about the Jews who live, in the area, and one turns to the other and says, "Those sneaky Jews," right? I'll never forget that. At any rate, well, Yehuda is trying to be a little bit sneaky here. And so, well, we had this whole exchange before where Yehuda said, "We'll be slaves, and the person who the chalice is found with will die." Okay? And then the head of the household said, No. Whoever the chalice is found with will be my slave, and the rest, you go back to your father. The rest are free to go. Okay? Well, Yehuda now knows what the punishment is for the person with whom the chalice is found, but he tries to change it again to avoid having to go back to his father and say, "We don't have Benjamin," right? So what does he say? He says, "Hineni avadim la'adoni gam anachnu gam asher nimsa gavia biado." Okay, behold, he says to Joseph, "We will be your slaves, both us and the one with whom the chalice is found." So Yehuda is basically trying to avoid the thing that he obviously dreads and fears the most, and that all of the brothers dread and fear the most, and that's having to go back to their father Jacob and say, "Listen, Dad, you were right. We don't have Benjamin. We lost your only other son of Rachel. He's gone. He's a slave in Egypt for the rest of his life." Okay, that they dread more than even becoming slaves themselves, and even more than even more than Benjamin dying and then becoming slaves. They dread having to go back to their father and say the one thing that they dread, that they definitely don't want to say, "Dad, we lost Benjamin," right? So, because he's right, Yaakov said, "Don't take Benjamin. If anything happens to him, you're gonna, sevati biagon shaola, right? You will bring my. They usually translate these. You bring my hoary head down to the grave in agony. Okay, you're gonna kill me if you come back. If anything happens to Benjamin, that's it. You've killed me essentially. I'm dead. I'm a dead man. Okay, and now they have to go back. And now now they're being threatened with the one thing they fear the most. No, Benjamin stays. You go back and face your father and tell him that Benjamin's not with you." And I'm sure I would assume that Yosef knows that this is the thing they dread the most. Either he overheard them or somehow just understands it. Okay, so Yomer Halilali, and so Yosef is now. It's really such subtle psychology here, because Yosef knows the whole story, so he's pretending to be a good guy, but really what he's really doing is sticking it to the brothers. He really wants to just make them pay. Before he has to reveal himself, he can't take it anymore. He really wants to make them pay for what they did to him 23 years earlier, right? He wants to really stick it to them. He wants them to know that this whole thing has come full circle, that his dream was correct when he had the 11 stars and the sun and the moon bowing down before him. That was correct. When he had the shibolet, the sheaves that bowing down before him, that was correct. Okay, and the brothers were wrong. Okay, and yes, he had to go through what he had to go through. The brothers had to go through what they had to go through over the past 23 years. But they were, and maybe it was all for the good, as Yosef will say soon in the next parsha. But the brothers have to realize that what they did was wrong. He really wants to take revenge on them. Stick it to them one last time before he forgives them. Right? He wants that whole thing to come full circle. He wants basically closure on it. One could say, to use a modern way of looking at it. Okay, so he says, Yomer Halilali me'asot zot. God forbid I should do such a thing. What kind of guy am I? I'm not a mean guy, but really he's being mean. He's being meaner back home. Ha'ish asher nimsa gavir biyado hu yeli eved. Whoever the person with whom the chalice is found, he will be my slave. V'tem alu l'shalom el avichem, and you go back in peace to your father. And he adds those words, your father, el avichem, to your father. He knows exactly that he's giving them the worst punishment they could possibly give them. It would have been better off if he killed them all, right? Better, they would rather be dead than have to face Yaakov and tell them that Benjamin is not with them. And so, at this cliffhanger, the parsha ends. And so, I think we'll wrap up the study for today. It was a very, very good study. We spoke a bit about the Maccabees at the beginning, and we learned that yes, the Maccabees do lay down Channukah, right? In first book of Maccabees, chapter 4, verse 59, and Judah and his brethren and all the congregation of Israel decreed that the day of the dedication of the altar should be kept in its season from year to year for 8 days, from the 5th, 5th, and 20th day of the months of Kislev, with joy and gladness. Okay, so there it is. Hanukkah is not a rabbinical holiday. Okay, Hanukkah is laid down by Judah HaMaccabee himself at the time when the temple was first cleansed, or at the time when the actual events that Hanukkah is based on took place. Okay, so do I keep Hanukkah? Absolutely. If I can keep Purim, which was laid down also not by God, but was laid down. You can read it in the last 2 chapters of the book of Esther. Was laid down by Mordecai and Esther. Basically, Mordecai, who sent different letters out, right? Basically telling all of the basically telling the Jews in all of the provinces of Persia to keep the holiday as they had already been doing in Shushan, the capital. So if we keep Purim, then and that was laid down as an extra biblical holiday, or as an extra, outside the Torah. It's not a chag that's coming from God. Then certainly we keep Hanukkah, which was laid down by Judah HaMaccabee himself. Okay. Regarding what we do on Hanukkah, obviously the oil miracle we've shown many times is not mentioned anywhere, neither in any of the books of Maccabees, or I should say not in the first 2 books of Maccabees, not in Josephus, which is already 250 years later, when the Pharisees and their oral law were in charge, basically, not mentioned. Okay, so it's clear that the oil miracle was invented later by the rabbis, probably during the Mishnaic or the Talmudic period. Okay, Mishnaic period. Okay, so I think it first appears in Braita in the Gemara. It's in my article that I linked to. Okay, so in terms of lighting the Hanukkah menorah, should we do it? Well, what does Yehuda Maccabee says? He says that how do you keep Hanukkah, 8 days of joy and gladness. Okay, so I guess that would mean, I don't know, just having special meals and inviting friends over, and basically 8 days of being happy and anything associated with that. Me personally, I do like the Hanukkah menorah because I grew up Jewish in a Jewish household, and I just love lighting the Hanukkah menorah. However, I do not say the blessing, specifically that very first blessing that the rabbis say, which is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah, which basically is saying that God commanded us to light the Hanukkah candles. Obviously, I don't say such a thing because God did not command us to light the Hanukkah candles, number one. And number two, because the Hanukkah menorah was instituted by the rabbis to commemorate this oil miracle, which never really occurred, historically speaking. So therefore, I certainly won't say that blessing. But just out of sentimental reasons, I in recent years have been lighting the Hanukkah menorah, just because Hanukkah was one of my favorite holidays. Singing the different songs with my family and lighting the Hanukkah menorah and all of this stuff. So that's why I do it. But it certainly is not required. You can certainly keep Hanukkah in your own way by having 8 days of joy and gladness, or maybe you don't want to keep Hanukkah at all. If it's not a Torah-based commandment, but it was laid down in by Judah and the other Maccabees. So I think that's good enough for me, since I have such great respect for them and what they did. So that's why I keep Hanukkah. Okay, so I think we're gonna end it here. Are there any final questions? So Black Miner 73 says, Yehovah approved the tradition of the Israelite family that lived in tents and drank no wine because of their father command. Right. So this is referring. Okay, I'm not even going to get into that right now, but yes, the swear. This is referring to. 1 second here. I'm not going to get into it now. It's going to take too long. But okay, let's end it here. Any final? But what Black Miner 73, I think, is saying is that this was kind of a swear that Judah Maccabee basically entered in, made the Israelites swear that they would keep this holiday, just as Mordechai and Esther made the Israelites swear that they would keep Purim from year to year. So this is falls on the same rubric. Although the Book of Esther did make it into the canon of the Tanakh, and the Book of Maccabees did not make it into the Jewish canon of the Tanakh. So, but all right, I've said my piece regarding it. So happy Hanukkah to everybody, and Chag Sameach, and Shabbat Shalom, and I guess we'll leave it at that. I'll put a little music on, and we'll finish up.